Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly, almost reverently, into a world shrouded in mist magic and the deep, resonant hum of ancient tradition. Imagine yourself not in your familiar modern bedroom, but nestled deep within a Celtic roundhouse somewhere in Iron Age Europe. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke from a central hearth, the earthy aroma of daub walls, and perhaps the faintest, almost imperceptible fragrance of wild herbs gathered from the surrounding forests. Tonight, we're listening for whispered names exploring the peculiar, often enchanting ancient Celtic rituals for welcoming newborns into a world that was both beautiful and fraught with peril. Now, picture this: you're trying to successfully navigate the complexities of childbirth in a dimly lit, peat-smoked Iron Age dwelling, without the comforting presence of modern medicine, perhaps with well-meaning relatives offering you moss-based poultices and enthusiastically chanting to ward off any passing and potentially rather mischievous fairies who might have taken an undue interest in your impending arrival. Your chances of a calm textbook delivery, as precisely outlined in your 21st century parenting app, would be, let's just say, charmingly unpredictable and probably involve a great deal more peat smoke and slightly less mood lighting than you're currently accustomed to. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to hear where you're joining me from on this misty journey tonight, and what time it is in your part of the world. Pop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself Egeria in the lands of the ancient Celts, a diverse tapestry of tribes and peoples who flourished across much of Europe, from the misty islands of Britain and Ireland to the forests of Gaul and the highlands of Anatolia, for centuries before and during the rise of Rome. We're focusing primarily on the Iron Age, that period, just before the Roman conquest began to irrevocably alter their world, though many of these deep-rooted customs would have persisted long after. The landscape around you is often wild, a patchwork of dense ancient forests where sunlight dapples the mossy ground, rolling hills crowned with formidable earthwork, hill forts, small scattered farming settlements nestled in river valleys, and perhaps misty, peat-rich boglands that seem to whisper secrets of the other world. It's a world where nature is not just a backdrop. It's a living, breathing entity imbued with spirits, deities, and unseen powers. Your destination is a Celtic roundhouse, the typical dwelling for many families. Imagine stepping inside your eyes, adjusting to the dim interior. It's a circular structure, perhaps 30 or 40 feet across its walls, made of sturdy timber posts interwoven with flexible branches, wattle, and then thickly plastered with a mixture of clay dung and straw daub to keep out the wind and rain. The roof is a masterpiece of conical thatch rising to a central point where a smoke hole allows some, but by no means all, of the smoke from the ever-present central hearth to escape. You step into this roundhouse. It's cozy and it permanently smells of fragrant wood smoke, drying herbs, and possibly a lingering hint of last week's very hearty boar stew kind of way. The lighting is what you might call moody pre-electricity chic, provided mostly by that central fire which is doing its valiant best to simultaneously cook dinner, provide warmth, and generously smoke out both any lurking evil spirits and your immediate ability to breathe without engaging in a series of small, polite coughs. Within this dwelling, or perhaps in a specially constructed, more secluded birthing hut, nearby a momentous event is unfolding or has just occurred: the arrival of a newborn child. A mainstream historical fact is that, for the ancient Celts, as for all pre-modern societies, childbirth was a significant and often highly dangerous event, fraught with peril for both mother and infant. Infant and maternal mortality rates were tragically high. Every successful birth, therefore, was not just a private family joy, but a triumph, a crucial victory against the ever-present specter of loss, a cause for communal relief and celebration. But the perils were not just physical. The ancient Celts, you see, lived in a world profoundly imbued with the supernatural. They believed in an other world, a realm existing parallel to their own, populated by a dazzling and sometimes rather alarming array of beings. Powerful gods and goddesses, nature, spirits, mischievous sprites, capricious fairies, the she or good folk of later Irish lore whose Iron Age precursors were likely just as unpredictable, and the ever-watchful spirits of the ancestors. The moments of birth and death were seen as a liminal times periods when the veil between this world and the other world was particularly thin. A newborn child fresh from that mysterious spiritual realm was considered especially vulnerable, not yet fully anchored to the human world, and therefore susceptible to being harmed or even stolen away by these otherworldly entities. Forget just worrying about your modern baby-proofing of electrical sockets and sharp corners. Ancient Celtic parents had the added and significantly more stressful daily concern of potentially mischievous puka attempting to swap their beautiful, gurgling newborn for a grumpy old log, enchanted to look like a baby or perhaps a particularly irritable fairy, who hadn't received a sufficiently respectful invitation to the welcome new human to the village feast. It was a full-time job, just keeping the otherworld out of the metaphorical nursery. Therefore, the arrival of a new baby was not just a medical or familial event. It was a profoundly sacred and spiritually charged occasion. This tiny new life represented the continuity of the kin group, the clan, the tribe. In a society where tribal strength often depended on numbers, each healthy newborn was a precious asset, a future warrior, a future mother, a future contributor to the community's prosperity and survival. The birth was a link in the great chain of being, connecting the ancestors of the past with the generations yet to come. It was a moment overseen by various deities, particularly goddesses associated with fertility, childbirth, motherhood, and protection. Figures like the widespread Brigid in the insular Celtic world, or perhaps local tutelary goddesses whose names are now lost to us. The precise nature and strict uniformity of ancient Celtic birthing rituals across the vast geographical areas they inhabited, from Ireland to Galatia and the many diverse tribal groups encompassed under the general term Celtic, remain subjects of ongoing scholarly investigation and careful reconstruction. As direct contemporary textual evidence from the Celts themselves concerning such intimate domestic practices is exceptionally scarce, forcing historians and archaeologists to rely heavily on later, often Christianized, folkloric accounts from Ireland and Wales, which may preserve echoes of older pagan traditions supplemented by Roman ethnographic descriptions, which are often biased or incomplete, and interpretations of archaeological finds. Yet even with these limitations, we can piece together a picture of a world where the birth of a child was met with a complex mixture of joy, anxiety, and a deep sense of the sacred. The air in the roundhouse would be thick with anticipation. The low murmur of women's voices, the mother's female relatives experienced midwives from the community, offering comfort, encouragement, and perhaps reciting ancient prayers or protective incantations. The scent of specific herbs known for their properties in easing labor or purifying the birthing space might mingle with the ever-present wood smoke. And as the first cry of the newborn finally cuts through the tense silence, a wave of relief and thanksgiving would wash over the assembled company. A new life has successfully navigated the perilous journey into this world. But the rituals of welcome protection, and crucially of naming, that first powerful act of whispering an identity into being, are only just beginning. You are now an unseen, empathetic observer, Egeria within the smoky, firelit confines of that ancient Celtic roundhouse, witnessing the sacred, perilous, and profoundly momentous arrival of a new life. The air is thick not just with the scent of burning peat or wood, but with anticipation, with whispered prayers, and with the very palpable presence of ancient tradition. Having set the scene, let us now turn our focus to the central figure in this timeless drama, the mother herself enduring the mother's trial, her experience shaped by the birthing ways of her Celtic people in this Iron Age world. A mainstream historical fact is that in most ancient societies, including the diverse Celtic world, childbirth was overwhelmingly a woman-centered event. It was a domain largely managed by and shared among women. Experienced midwives, knowledgeable female relatives, and supportive companions. Men, with very few exceptions, perhaps a druid or a healer in dire circumstances, or the anxious father pacing well out of earshot, were typically excluded from the immediate birthing space. This wasn't necessarily out of a sense of prudishness, but more likely from a deep-seated understanding that birth was women's sacred business, a powerful, mysterious process best navigated by those who understood its rhythms and its risks firsthand. Your Celtic birthing team, therefore, is probably composed of your toughest, most stoic aunts, your wisest, most experienced grandmother who has likely delivered more babies than the local chieftain has had hot dinners, and a respected local midwife whose calm demeanor and skilled hands have seen countless new souls into the world with nothing more than some soothing chants. a selection of well-chosen herbs and a very determined, encouraging expression. No epidurals on offer here, I'm afraid. Just sheer human grit and possibly some surprisingly effective, if slightly scratchy, moss-based remedies. The birthing environment itself would be a far cry from a modern, sterile delivery room. You might find yourself as the laboring mother in a specially prepared, somewhat secluded area within the main roundhouse, perhaps screened off with woolen hangings for privacy and warmth. Or in some communities, there might have been a dedicated birthing hut, a temporary or semi-permanent structure set a little apart specifically for this sacred and vulnerable time. The space would be kept warm by the ever-present hearth fire, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the wattle and daub walls. The floor might be covered with fresh straw, bracken, or animal furs for a degree of comfort and to absorb the inevitable mess. While lacking our understanding of germ theory, there would undoubtedly have been attempts at cleanliness using available resources. Fresh water, perhaps boiled, and clean linens if the household was prosperous. When it comes to the actual process of delivery, forget the image of a woman lying passively flat on her back in a bed. That particular birthing position is a relatively recent and not always physiologically optimal development in Western medical history. In your ancient Celtic setting, Egeria, you are far more likely to be encouraged to adopt upright active positions that work with gravity. You might be squatting supported by the strong arms of your female attendants. You might be kneeling, perhaps gripping a sturdy post or a rope slung from the rafters. Some archaeological and ethnographic evidence from various traditional cultures suggests the use of birthing stones, or specially constructed birthing chairs or stools designed to support the mother in an upright or semi-reclining posture. Celtic birthing was likely an active, often arduous physical affair. Squatting, kneeling, perhaps even a bit of rhythmic swaying, or what might look to an outsider like a rather intense interpretive dance to encourage the baby's descent, whatever it took to bring that new life into the world. It was a significant workout with a very specific, very loud, and incredibly tiny reward at the very end. The trial aspect of childbirth was intensely real. The pain, of course, would have been immense endured without modern analgesia. But beyond the physical agony, the dangers were profound. Complications that are often manageable today, a breech presentation, prolonged labor, postpartum hemorrhage, or infection, could all too easily prove fatal for either mother or child, or both. Every successful birth was a testament to the mother's strength and endurance and the skill and luck of her attendants. The precise nature of pharmacological knowledge possessed by ancient Celtic midwives, particularly their detailed understanding and specific use of locally sourced herbs for effective pain relief, to facilitate labor or to manage dangerous complications during and after childbirth, is exceptionally difficult to ascertain with complete certainty, as this knowledge was almost exclusively transmitted orally from woman to woman, relying largely on later, often fragmented folkloric traditions, comparative ethnography from other traditional societies, and sometimes ambiguous archaeological evidence for medicinal plants, making it a constant area of careful scholarly investigation. Alongside the physical trial, there was the ever-present spiritual battle. As we touched upon, this liminal period of birth made both you, the mother, and your newborn intensely vulnerable to malevolent influences from the other world. Your attendants would not just be offering physical comfort and practical assistance, they would also be engaged in spiritual protection, reciting charms, prayers, or ancient incantations, perhaps using specific herbs or objects believed to ward off evil spirits, ill luck, or the unwanted attentions of the less benevolent members of the fairy folk. Once your baby has finally arrived, a new set of rituals and cares would begin. The immediate post-birth period would focus on ensuring your well-being mother. You would be gently cleaned, perhaps with warmed water infused with specific herbs. You would be encouraged to rest to regain your strength. Special nourishing foods and drinks would be prepared for you, perhaps a fortifying broth or a drink made with honey and milk designed to restore your energy and promote healing. Ritual purification for both you and the child to cleanse away the blood. And perceived spiritual vulnerability of birth would also be a crucial next step, something we'll explore in more detail soon. The value placed on motherhood in Celtic society, as in most traditional cultures, was immense. By successfully navigating the perilous trial of childbirth and bringing a new member into the kin group, you, Egeria, have fulfilled one of your most vital roles. Your status within the family and the community is affirmed and enhanced. especially if you have born a healthy child, and particularly if that child is a son who can continue the patrilineage, inherit property, and eventually become a warrior or provider for the tribe. After successfully bringing a new little Celtic warrior, or perhaps a future skilled weaver into the world, the triumphant Celtic mother probably deserved at the very least a year's uninterrupted supply of the finest local honey mead. A very, very long nap lasting several days, and a solemn, unbreakable vow from all other household members that no one would ask her to churn, butter grind grain, or engage in any remotely strenuous activity for at least a full lunar cycle. Childbirth in this ancient world was an epic feat of courage and endurance, a true mother's trial. A quirky or fringe tidbit often associated with Celtic traditions, though its direct Iron Age attestation can be elusive, is the symbolic importance of certain plants or natural objects in the birthing process. For instance, rowan berries or branches were often considered highly protective against evil spirits, and might have been hung over the doorway of the birthing space. Specific types of moss might have been used for their absorbent or perceived healing properties. And hold stones, natural stones with a hole through them, were sometimes seen as powerful amulets believed to aid in an easy delivery, if the laboring woman looked through the hole held it or had it placed upon her body. These practices speak to a deep connection with the natural world and a belief in its inherent magical and protective qualities. Your birthing room Ageria is not just a physical space, it's a carefully curated environment of practical support, spiritual protection, and ancient woman-centered wisdom. The mother's trial is over, Ageria. Within the smoky warmth of the Celtic roundhouse, or perhaps an especially consecrated birthing hut, a new life has against considerable odds successfully made its perilous journey into the world. The cries of the newborn, sharp and vital, cut through the lingering scent of herbs and wood smoke, a sound that brings both immense relief and a fresh wave of profound, almost instinctual anxiety. For in the worldview of the ancient Celts, the physical dangers of birth, though significant, were only one part of the challenge. Now began a period of intense spiritual vulnerability for this tiny new arrival. Your brand new Celtic baby isn't just a cute, gurgling, slightly damp bundle of joy. In the eyes of your community, it's a liminal being, a threshold creature, precariously balanced between this world and the mysterious, often dangerous, other world from which it has so recently emerged. A mainstream historical fact is that in many ancient cultures, including the diverse Celtic societies of Iron Age Europe, infants were considered to be in a highly vulnerable and transitional state, not yet fully integrated into the human community or the protective sphere of their kin group, and therefore particularly susceptible to malevolent supernatural forces, ill luck, or the unwanted attentions of non-human entities. This belief underpinned a wide array of protective rituals and deeply ingrained customs surrounding early infancy. The baby, in essence, hadn't quite unpacked its bags from its previous otherworldly existence and was still getting a rather strong signal from the spiritual Wi-Fi of the great beyond, making it an easy target for supernatural interference. Imagine yourself, Ageria, as a new Celtic mother, or a close female relative gazing down at this tiny, fragile being. The joy is immense, of course, but it's tempered by a deep-seated awareness of the unseen perils that lurk just beyond the firelight. The Celts believed in a vibrant, often intrusive otherworld, a realm populated by a bewildering array of spirits, powerful nature, deities, mischievous sprites, territorial, ancestral ghosts, and perhaps most famously the Shida, or good folk, the fairies of later Irish and Scottish folklore whose Iron Age precursors were likely viewed with a similar mixture of respect, fear, and a strong desire to keep them at a very safe distance, especially where newborns were concerned. These beings were not necessarily always malevolent in the way a Christian devil might be, but they were capricious, easily offended, and possessed powers beyond human comprehension. And newborn infants, still trailing clouds of otherworldly glory, so to speak, were thought to be particularly attractive to them. One of the most persistent and widespread fears was that of the changeling. A quirky or fringe tidbit, though one with deep roots in Celtic and wider European folklore, is the profound belief in changelings. The terrifying idea that fairies or other supernatural beings might steal away a healthy human baby and leave in its place one of their own sickly, ill-tempered, or strangely wizened offspring, or sometimes even an enchanted piece of wood or a bundle of rags made to look like an infant. If your Celtic baby was unusually colicky, refused to thrive, had an unnervingly knowing look in its eye, or perhaps possessed a suspicious fondness for demanding tiny flagons of strong mead and complaining loudly about the substandard quality of the local bardic recitations, you didn't just immediately assume it was a touch of gas or a difficult personality. Oh no. The chilling thought would arise, have the good folk been here? Is this even my child, or is it some grumpy old fairy in a surprisingly convincing baby suit, probably already plotting to rearrange the household deities and teach the chickens to sing mildly seditious battle hymns? There were, of course, numerous folk rituals and tests designed to try and ascertain if a baby was a changeling, and if so, to either drive it away or coax the return of the true human child. Rituals often involving fire iron or specific herbs, all things believed to be anathema to otherworldly beings. Beyond the dramatic fear of changelings, the newborn was also considered vulnerable to the evil eye. The notion that a glance from an envious or malevolent person could inflict harm, illness, or bad luck upon the child. Accidental curses or the ill wishes of someone slighted by the family could also target this most fragile member of the household. Even the spirits of unappeased ancestors or restless ghosts might seek to trouble the infant. This pervasive sense of spiritual peril was undoubtedly compounded by the harsh realities of high infant mortality rates. In a world without antibiotics, vaccinations, or a scientific understanding of disease transmission, any sudden illness, any fretful crying jag, any failure to thrive could easily be attributed to these unseen malevolent forces. The precise nature and full extent of ancient Celtic beliefs regarding the journey of the soul before birth and its gradual ritually assisted anchoring into the world of the living after birth are subjects of ongoing scholarly reconstruction. As these concepts rely heavily on careful interpretations of later mythological narratives from Ireland and Wales, which often preserve much older pre-Christian thematic elements, comparative studies of other Indo-European belief systems, and the sometimes ambiguous symbolism found in Celtic archaeology, given that direct contemporary Celtic theological texts or detailed philosophical treatises on the soul's journey are effectively non-existent. What is clear, however, is that this transitional period for the newborn was seen as critically dangerous. The very thresholds of the roundhouse, the doorway, the smoke hole in the roof, even perhaps a window opening, were considered particularly vulnerable points, liminal spaces, where the boundaries between this world and the other world were thin and easily crossed by uninvited supernatural guests. You can imagine Celtic parents being especially vigilant about these entry points, perhaps hanging protective herbs like rowan or saint, John's wort over the lintel, or placing objects made of iron, a metal often believed to repel fairies and evil spirits near the cradle. It wasn't just about baby-proofing against physical dangers like drafts or wandering livestock. It was about spiritually fortifying the home against actual literal demons, mischievous sprites, and any number of otherworldly entities who might be trying to sneak in for a bit of baby snatching or general supernatural mischief. Did you remember to hang those freshly picked rowan twigs above the doorway, dear? A new mother might anxiously ask her partner. And did you check that the iron fire poker is still by the hearth? I thought I heard a rather suspicious rustling in the thatch earlier, and I'm not entirely convinced it was just the wind or that particularly large and opinionated raven that likes to sit on our roof and pass judgment on my cooking. Furthermore, until the child was formally named and integrated into the community through specific rituals, which we will explore in upcoming sections, it might be considered even more spiritually adrift, less real. In a social and protective sense, its identity is still somewhat fluid and unformed. The act of bestowing a name was not just a label. It was a powerful act of claiming, of defining, of anchoring the child firmly to its kin and to the world of the living. This understanding of the newborn as a threshold being, a Geria suspended between worlds and beset by potential otherworldly perils, is absolutely fundamental to making sense of the many peculiar, protective, and welcoming rituals that surrounded early infancy in the ancient Celtic world. Every charm, every purification, every whispered blessing, and ultimately the crucial act of naming itself was designed to safeguard this precious new life, to sever its lingering ties to the perilous otherworld, and to fully and safely incorporate it into the human family and the protective embrace of the tribe. You're now acutely aware, Ageria, of the precarious spiritual tightrope your newborn Celtic baby is walking. This tiny, precious being, fresh from the mysterious otherworld, is seen as intensely vulnerable, a liminal soul, not yet fully anchored to the mundane realities of human existence, and therefore an irresistible target for all manner of unseen forces, from mischievous sprites to genuinely malevolent entities. The joy of birth in your Iron Age roundhouse is thus immediately followed by a period of heightened vigilance, and crucially by a series of ancient powerful purification rituals designed to cleanse, protect, and formally welcome both mother and child into the safe embrace of the community. It's like the ancient Celtic version of a very intense, spiritually supercharged, deep clean and security systems check all rolled into one. The precise details and exact regional variations of ancient Celtic purification rituals surrounding childbirth and early infancy are not, unfortunately, extensively documented in contemporary written sources from the Celts themselves, as their deepest religious and customary knowledge was often transmitted orally by druids and elders, forcing modern archaeologists and historians to carefully reconstruct these practices from often indirect evidence. This includes later folkloric parallels from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Brittany, which may preserve echoes of much older pagan traditions, comparative ethnography from other traditional societies, and the symbolic interpretation of archaeological finds from a Celtic domestic or potentially ritual contexts. However, despite the mists of time, we can discern a strong emphasis on the cleansing and protective power of three fundamental elements: water, fire, and sacred smoke. Let's start with water. The newborn's first bath. Egeria would be far more than a simple hygienic wash. Water, especially water from sacred springs, holy wells, or fast-flowing rivers, was considered by the Celts to be a powerful purifying agent, capable of washing away not just physical grime, but also spiritual contamination or any lingering unwelcome influences from the other world. Your Celtic baby's first bath isn't just a quick dip with some gentle hypoallergenic, organically sourced moss-based soap. Oh no, it's a full-on spiritually significant spa day, likely involving specially collected water, perhaps warmed over the sacred hearth fire and possibly infused with specific protective herbs known for their cleansing properties. Imagine the scene: an elder woman, perhaps the midwife or a respected grandmother, carefully laving the infant's tiny limbs, murmuring ancient blessings or incantations, symbolically washing away any residual otherworldly connections, and dedicating the child to the protection of the family and tribal deities. This ritual bath might also be seen as a form of gentle introduction to the elements of this world, a blessing for health and strength. The mother, too, still recovering from the ordeal of childbirth, and also considered to be in a state of ritual impurity and spiritual vulnerability, would undergo her own ceremonial cleansing with water, marking her transition back into the everyday life of the community. Next comes fire, that most potent and primal of purifiers, a symbol of light, life, and protection in countless cultures. Fire was believed to have the power to drive away evil spirits, to burn away negative influences, and to consecrate a space or an individual. For a newborn, this might involve a ritual where the baby, held securely, is carefully and symbolically passed over or near a specially kindled flame, or perhaps near the sacred central hearth of the roundhouse. Now, before your modern sensibilities rightly recoil in horror, this wasn't about actually barbecuing the baby, Egeria. It was a highly symbolic act performed with utmost care. Think less medieval rotisserie chicken and more gently smoke curing the precious infant to ensure all lurking evil spirits are thoroughly deterred, and the child achieves a lovely, protective, and slightly peaty aroma. Health and safety standards in the Iron Age were, shall we say, somewhat more robustly interpreted and less litigious. The central hearth fire itself was often seen as the sacred heart of the home, a direct link to ancestral spirits and protective household deities. Formally presenting the newborn to this hearth fire, perhaps with specific offerings or prayers, would have been another way to place the child under its protective aura and integrate it into the family's spiritual center. And then there's sacred smoke. The Celts, like many indigenous cultures, understood the power of fumigation, the burning of specific herbs, resins, or woods to create a purifying, protective, or spiritually charged atmosphere. After a birth, the birthing space, the mother, and the newborn child might all be ritually cleansed with sacred smoke. Juniper, with its pungent, resinous aroma, was a common choice across many European traditions for its powerful purifying and protective qualities. Rowan, another tree held in high magical esteem by the Celts for its apotropaic, evil-averting properties, might have its leaves or small branches burned. Other local herbs known to the community's wise women for their specific virtues could also be employed. The amount of sacred purifying herb smoke deliberately filling the roundhouse during these rituals might have been quite considerable enough to make your eyes water, your throat catch, and most importantly, to send any nearby bad spirits, mischievous fairies, or general otherworldly riffraff coughing and spluttering their way back to whatever gloomy dimension they crawled out of. Begone foul sprites and unwelcome ethereal entities. You can almost hear the officiating elder chant amidst the swirling fragrant haze, and kindly take your otherworldly allergies and your nefarious baby-swapping intentions with you. A mainstream historical fact is that ritual purification involving these core elements, water for washing and lustration fire for its consuming and protective power, and smoke from sacred plants for fumigation and blessing, was a common and deeply significant feature in many ancient religious and social practices, including those of Celtic societies. These rites were particularly crucial surrounding life transition events like birth, marriage, and death times, when individuals and communities were considered especially vulnerable to spiritual imbalance or hostile supernatural forces. A quirky or fringe tidbit from later Celtic folklore, which may well preserve echoes of these ancient purification rites, is the meticulous attention paid to the specific incantations or charms, senechi or ortha, that would be recited during these ceremonies. These weren't just random mumblings, they were often complex poetic formulas invoking the names of protective deities, ancestral spirits, or the inherent virtues of the elements themselves. Sometimes the ritual might involve tying protective knots in cords or threads, while chanting these words, the physical act reinforcing the magical intent. The power of the spoken word, especially when combined with sacred actions and materials, was considered immense. The ultimate goal of all these cleansing rites, the lustral baths, the passing through fire or smoke, was to ensure that both you, the recovering mother, and your precious newborn child were rendered ritually clean, spiritually fortified, and safe from any lingering taint of the otherworld or the attentions of malevolent forces. Only then, once this essential spiritual groundwork had been laid, could the child be fully and safely welcomed into the human community, ready for the next crucial rite of passage, the bestowing of a name, an identity, and a place within the intricate web of Celtic kinship. The journey from the threshold of the otherworld to a secure place by the family hearth was a carefully managed, ritually intensive process. The sacred elemental forces of water, fire, and cleansing smoke have now done their vital work, Ageria. Both you, the recovering Celtic mother, and your precious newborn have been ritually purified. An essential step in washing away the spiritual vulnerabilities of childbirth and beginning the process of anchoring this new little soul firmly into the world of the living. The air in your Iron Age roundhouse, while still carrying the familiar comforting scent of wood smoke from the central hearth, perhaps now also bears the faintest trace of burnt juniper or sacred herbs, a lingering testament to these protective rites. But the care and magical safeguarding of your infant are far from over. Now come the equally important rituals of the first. Embrace the first wrappings, the first nourishment, and the subtle continuous weaving of protective enchantments around this fragile new life. One of the first things that would happen to your Celtic baby once it has been bathed and blessed is swaddling. A mainstream historical fact is that the practice of swaddling newborns, wrapping them tightly in bands of cloth, usually linen or soft wool, was incredibly common, almost universal, across many ancient and pre-modern cultures, including those of Celtic Europe. Imagine the scene: an experienced grandmother or midwife takes the infant, its tiny limbs still new to the world, and carefully, expertly binds it into a snug, secure bundle. The baby's arms might be secured by its side, its legs kept straight. To modern eyes, accustomed to images of freely kicking babies in loose onesies, this tight wrapping might look restrictive, almost confining. But for your Celtic ancestors, Ageria swaddling served multiple important purposes. It was believed to help the baby's limbs grow straight and strong. It provided warmth crucial in drafty roundhouses, especially during the colder seasons. It offered a sense of security and containment, perhaps mimicking the comforting pressure of the womb, which could help to soothe a fretful infant. And from a purely practical standpoint, a neatly swaddled baby was easier to carry, to manage, and perhaps even to keep safe from accidentally scratching itself or rolling into an unsafe position. That Celtic baby is swaddled up tighter than a particularly well-wrapped prize-winning sausage roll at the village fair. It's partly for warmth, partly to ensure its little limbs achieve optimal straightness for future spear throwing or loom working, and partly you strongly suspect to prevent it from accidentally attempting to astral project back to the other world before it's even been given a proper earthly name. Very secure, very sensible from an Iron Age perspective. Symbolically, the act of swaddling could also be seen as a further binding of the child to the human world. A physical act of containment that helped to secure its fragile spirit within its new earthly form, protecting it from those ever-present, potentially intrusive otherworldly forces we discussed. The swaddling bands themselves might even have protective symbols woven into them or have been made from cloth imbued with some specific blessing or charm. Next comes the first and most vital nourishment, mother's milk. Breastfeeding was, of course, the universal norm and absolute necessity for infant survival in the ancient world. The mother's first milk, the colostrum, though your Celtic ancestors wouldn't have known the precise immunological science behind it, would have been recognized for its supreme importance in giving the newborn strength and protection. The act of the first suckling would be a powerful moment of bonding, of life-giving connection between you, the mother, and your child. In some traditions, this first feeding might be accompanied by its own small rituals or whispered prayers, asking for the milk to flow abundantly and for the child to thrive. Wet nurses might have been employed in certain circumstances, if the mother tragically died in childbirth, if her milk failed, or perhaps in very high-status families where the mother's other duties were deemed paramount. But the ideal and by far the most common practice was for the mother to nurse her own child. Alongside these practical acts of care, a constant, subtle layer of protective magic or enchantment would surround the newborn. We've already touched upon the general warding of the birthing space, but now specific charms and amulets might be placed on or near the baby itself. The well-dressed and well-protected Celtic baby probably sported more mystical bling than a particularly flamboyant archdruid on festival day. A small sprig of rowan wood known for its potent anti-fairy properties might be tied to the cradle. A piece of iron, a small nail, a tiny ring, could be tucked into the swaddling clothes, as iron was widely believed to repel spirits and malevolent magic. Amber beads fossilized sea urchins, often called fairy loaves or shepherd's crowns in later folklore, or distinctively shaped hold stones might be hung above the cradle or worn by the child as protective amulets. Animal teeth or claws, perhaps from a powerful totem animal like a boar or a wolf, could also serve this purpose. The specific meanings and intended efficacy of various small archaeological finds that are presumed to be Celtic infant amulets or cradle charms, such as uniquely shaped pebbles, worked bone fragments, or tiny bronze trinkets, are often difficult to determine with absolute certainty, leading to ongoing scholarly discussion about distinguishing between what might have been practical decorations, simple toys, cherished folk beliefs, or parts of more formally codified ritual magic in the multi-layered protection of newborns. The cradle itself, likely a sturdy construction of wood or woven wicker, perhaps lined with soft animal furs or moss for comfort, would be the baby's immediate protective environment. Its placement within the roundhouse would be carefully considered, perhaps near the warmth and sanctity of the central hearth, but away from drafty doorways or areas considered spiritually vulnerable. Protective symbols might be carved into the cradle's frame, or specific herbs known for their warding properties might be strewn beneath it. Even the lullabies sung to soothe the infant would likely be more than just simple soothing melodies. Celtic lullabies, as hinted at in later surviving folk traditions, often incorporated protective verses invoking the blessings of benevolent deities or ancestral spirits, or subtly warning away any lurking, unfriendly entities. They weren't just your standard rockabye baby on the treetop. They were more like, "Sleep now, my tiny future warrior/weaver, and may the spirits of the sacred oak and the swift-flowing river guard your precious dreams, and may no grumpy, ill-intentioned puka with a penchant for baby swapping even think about crossing this threshold." Also, here are 17 verses detailing the heroic deeds of your great-great-grandfather, who once single-handedly wrestled a giant badger. Sweet dreams, little one. A quirky or fringe tidbit which resonates through later Celtic folklore and might well have ancient roots, is the idea that the first water a baby was washed in, or the very first food it tasted beyond mother's milk. Perhaps a symbolic, minuscule dab of honey butter or mead placed on its tongue for good luck. and future sweetness of speech or prosperity at a slightly later stage, often around the naming ceremony, was considered to have a powerful, almost magical, significance for its future health character or destiny. These first sensory experiences were imbued with ritual weight. Throughout these early days and weeks, your female kin, your mother, your grandmother, your aunts, your sisters, would be your constant companions and guides Ageria. They would share their accumulated wisdom on childcare assist, with the practicalities, and crucially participate in maintaining this continuous web of protective ritual and loving care around you and your vulnerable newborn, ensuring that the first embrace of this world was one of safety, nourishment, and magical vigilant safeguarding. Your precious Celtic newborn Ageria has now been through the initial crucial rites of purification. The sacred waters have washed away any lingering otherworldly residues. The protective smoke of juniper or rowan has cleansed the birthing space and fortified the infant against unseen malevolence, and the power of fire has symbolically seared away spiritual impurities. The baby, swaddled tightly and having received its first life-sustaining nourishment from its mother, is now at least partially shielded from the most immediate supernatural perils. But there is another vital step, another profound rite of passage that must be undertaken to fully anchor this new soul to the world of the living, to bestow upon it a distinct identity, and to formally incorporate it into the intricate web of kinship and community, the naming ceremony. In the ancient Celtic worldview, as in many traditional cultures across the globe, a name was far more than just a convenient label, a sequence of sounds used for identification. A name was believed to be intrinsically linked to an individual's essence, their character, their destiny, even their very soul. An unnamed child, therefore, was in a precarious state, not yet fully a person in the social or spiritual sense, still somewhat adrift in that liminal space between the otherworld and the human realm. An unnamed Celtic baby was probably seen as existing in a kind of spiritual beta mode. Undeniably cute, definitely present in a gurgling, demanding sort of way, but not yet fully installed into the societal operating system of the tribe. The naming ceremony was in essence the official "Welcome to the human race, kid. Here's your unique identifier and your official membership card for the clan event." It was a moment of profound significance. When did this crucial ceremony take place? It wasn't necessarily immediately upon birth. A mainstream historical fact is that naming ceremonies in many ancient societies, including those with Celtic traditions, often occurred some days, weeks, or even longer after the birth. This delay might have served a practical purpose in an era of tragically high infant mortality. Families may have waited until the child had shown clear signs of viability of being strong enough to survive the perilous first few days or weeks of life before formally bestowing a name and fully investing their emotional and social capital in its future. The naming might also have been timed to coincide with specific auspicious moments, perhaps a particular phase of the moon, a seasonal festival, or even until the child reached a minor developmental milestone like taking its first steps or uttering its first recognizable sound, though that last one might be pushing it for a naming ceremony. Guga probably wouldn't cut it as a heroic Celtic name. A quirky or fringe tidbit drawn from later Irish sagas and folklore, which often preserve echoes of much older Celtic customs, is the idea that a child might not be considered to have truly arrived or be entirely safe from being snatched away by the fairies until they were formally and publicly named. The act of naming, of speaking that specific sequence of sounds with intent and communal recognition, served to fix the child to this world, to claim it definitively for the human kin group, and to place it under the protection of the family's ancestral spirits and tutelary deities. Some legendary tales even suggest a hero might not receive his true or adult name until he performed his first significant deed, though this is more the realm of heroic narrative than everyday infant naming. The precise timing and the specific ritual components of ancient Celtic naming ceremonies likely varied considerably across the different regions of the vast Celtic-speaking world, from Ireland to Gaul, from Britain to Galatia, and undoubtedly evolved over the many centuries of their pre-Christian history, with direct archaeological evidence for these intimate, often ephemeral family rituals being exceptionally rare. This forces scholars to rely heavily on later textual sources such as medieval Irish and Welsh laws, and literature careful analysis of personal names themselves, and cautious comparative deductions from other Indo-European cultures. Who had the honor and the responsibility of bestowing the name? In the predominantly patriarchal structure of Celtic society, the father often played the key role, especially for sons. By giving the child a name, he was formally acknowledging it as his own, accepting it into his lineage, and conferring upon it the rights and responsibilities associated with that kinship. The mother, however, who had carried and birthed the child, would undoubtedly have had significant influence, particularly in suggesting names or expressing preferences, especially for daughters, or if she had experienced a significant dream or omen during her pregnancy that seemed to suggest a particular name. For families of high status, or if the choice of name was considered particularly momentous or fraught with potential supernatural implications. A druid if we are in a period and region where druids still held sway. A local seer, a respected elder, or a wise woman known for her spiritual insight might have been consulted or even asked to officiate or bless the naming. Let's imagine the scene of your Celtic baby's naming day Agaria. The kin group, the extended family, and perhaps close friends and important members of the community would gather. The ceremony might take place within the protective confines of the roundhouse, perhaps around the sacred central hearth, or it could be held at a significant outdoor location. Beside a holy well whose waters were deemed pure and life-giving, beneath the boughs of an ancient venerated tree like an oak, or an ash sacred to the Celts, or even at an ancestral burial mound, thus linking the newborn directly to the spirits of those who came before. The child, perhaps freshly bathed and swaddled in a new, specially woven or decorated cloth, would be formally presented. There might be offerings made, a libation of milk or ale poured onto the earth, a small portion of grain or bread given to the fire, or perhaps even a symbolic sacrifice depending on the solemnity of the occasion and the status of the family. Then would come the central act, the bestowal of the name. This might involve the father or another designated elder taking the child in their arms, looking into its eyes, and then perhaps after a moment of quiet contemplation or a whispered prayer speaking the chosen name aloud for all to hear, formally declaring the child's identity. This public pronouncement would be met with acclamations, blessings, and words of good fortune from the assembled company. Choosing a Celtic baby name wasn't like idly flicking through a modern baby name app looking for something that sounds vaguely fashionable or pairs well with the surname. Oh no, it was serious, deeply considered business. You couldn't just whimsically call your son Kevin because it had a nice ring to it and you once knew a pleasant, if somewhat unmemorable Kevin back in Roman Gaul. The name had to have meaning, it had to have power, it often had to reflect lineage or desired qualities, and it preferably shouldn't sound too alarmingly similar to the known name of that notoriously grumpy, shape-shifting badger spirit who was rumored to live down by the Misty Creek and had a particular dislike for improperly named infants. The Celtic naming ceremony you can picture probably involved a very solemn, slightly nervous pronouncement of the chosen name by the dad, hoping he got the archaic pronunciation just right. Maybe a slightly more confident druid attempting to get the ritual blessing fire lit with some stubbornly damp sacred wood, and a whole circle of relatives nodding with grave approval, while secretly and with great anticipation, wondering if there would be enough honey cakes and roasted boar at the celebratory feast that was sure to follow. Some things, it seems, are truly universal across the ages. And this bestowal of a name, this vital rite of passage, was the moment your Celtic newborn truly ceased to be just a threshold being and officially became a recognized, named individual ready to take their place in the vibrant, challenging, and spiritually rich world of the ancient Celts. The naming day has arrived, Ageria. Your tiny Celtic newborn, having successfully navigated the initial perils of birth and the crucial rites of purification, is now ready to be formally endowed with perhaps the most potent, magical, and social toolkit it will ever receive its name. As we've touched upon, this isn't just a casual christening with a nice slice of honey cake afterwards, though a celebratory feast is almost certainly on the agenda, don't you worry. In the ancient Celtic worldview, the act of naming was a profound ritual, a moment imbued with inherent power, capable of shaping identity, ensuring protection, and formally weaving the child into the very fabric of its kin and cosmos. And central to this, or at least a fascinating and recurring motif in our understanding of these ancient practices, is the peculiar and possibly magical act of whispering the name. A mainstream historical fact is that in many oral cultures worldwide, including strong inferences from later Celtic traditions and comparative Indo-European linguistics, the spoken word itself, and particularly the act of naming, was believed to hold immense creative, defining, and magical power. Words weren't just arbitrary sounds. They were seen as potent vessels of essence and energy. To speak a name was not merely to identify, it was to invoke, to summon, to give form and substance to a being's very soul. The careful, ritually correct bestowal of a name was therefore considered absolutely vital for an individual's future well-being, their character, and their destiny. The Celts really believed words had power, you see. You didn't just casually shout a baby's newly chosen name across the smoky expanse of the roundhouse as if you were calling in the dogs for supper. Oh no. You whispered it with focused intent, with solemn reverence, like you were carefully programming its tiny, unformed soul with good fortune, heroic potential, and perhaps a lifelong aversion to eating suspiciously shiny berries found growing near fairy mounds. It's like ancient bioacoustic soul imprinting, but with significantly more beards, a lot less peer-reviewed scientific data, and a much higher chance of a druid being involved. So why the whisper? Why this soft, almost secretive utterance for such a momentous occasion? The reasons are likely multifaceted, rooted in both practical spiritual caution and profound magical belief. Firstly, remember the newborn's extreme vulnerability to the otherworld. Even after purification rites, the infant is still considered a liminal being, not yet fully anchored. Shouting its true name to the four winds too early might be seen as an open invitation to any passing mischievous sprites, disgruntled ancestral ghosts, or overly curious and potentially acquisitive members of the fairy folk who might be eavesdropping. These entities, it was believed, could gain power over an individual if they knew their true or soul name. Whispering the name, therefore, particularly in its very first utterance, could be a vital protective measure. It's like giving your baby a super secret, divinely encrypted magical password for its soul. Okay, little one. The namer might softly breathe into the infant's tiny ear. Your public-facing everyday user ID will be Boudica Jr., the remarkably loud. But your real top-secret spiritual Wi-Fi password to connect directly with the ancestral spirit realm and repel unwanted supernatural malware is Fluffy Cloud Shepherdess dancing with 7 silver salmon. Don't under any circumstances tell the fairies, or your annoying older cousin who always tries to steal your honeyed parsnips. Secondly, the act of whispering imbues the moment with a sense of intimacy, sacredness, and focused intent. It's a gentle introduction of the name to the child's own nascent consciousness, a soft breath of identity breathed directly into its being. The whisper is for the child, for the closest kin, and for the benevolent household gods and ancestral spirits who are invited to witness and bless this rite, not necessarily for every Tom, Dick, and Deirdre in the wider settlement, at least not initially. The power of the name is being carefully concentrated, delivered with precision to its intended recipient. Who would perform this significant act of name whispering? It could be the father as the head of the household, formally claiming the child and bestowing upon it its patrilineal identity. It might be the mother in a quiet, intimate moment, whispering a name filled with her hopes and dreams for her child. Or for families of higher status, or if the name itself was believed to have been divined through omens or dreams. A respected elder, a wise woman of the community, or even a druid in periods and regions where their influence remains strong might be tasked with this sacred first utterance. Imagine the pressure on the official name whisperer, Egeria. You have to get the pronunciation just right, the intonation perfect, the accompanying blessings correctly formulated. You mispronounce a crucial sacred syllable or accidentally whisper the name with a hint of lingering indigestion from last night's boar stew, and instead of imbuing the child with the heroic essence of brave warrior of the mighty oak who can single-handedly wrestle badgers, the poor kid ends up with the slightly less impressive spiritual signature of slightly damp and chronically ineffectual moss, growing on a moderately sized rock. People details were paramount. The whispering might occur at a specific point within the larger naming ceremony. Perhaps it's the very first time the chosen name is spoken in the child's presence before it is then announced more publicly to the assembled kin. Or it could be part of a more elaborate ritual accompanied by other symbolic actions. Anointing the child with sacred water, touching it with a specific plant or stone, or holding it up to the first light of dawn. The exact ritual mechanics and the full symbolic significance of name-whispering ceremonies among the diverse ancient Celtic peoples, if indeed it was a widespread and formally distinct practice across all regions, are largely matters of careful scholarly reconstruction. Adiani, direct contemporary ethnographic descriptions of such intimate family rituals are virtually non-existent. This forces researchers to rely on clues from comparative folklore, linguistic analysis of the structure, and etymology of surviving Celtic personal names and interpretations of later medieval Irish and Welsh mythological accounts, where names frequently possess profound magical power and are often bestowed under extraordinary or secretive circumstances. A quirky or fringe tidbit that highlights the perceived power and importance of names and their correct utterance is found in some Celtic folk traditions, and indeed in many cultures worldwide concerning telling the bees. While not directly about whispering a name to a baby, the custom of formally announcing important family news, births, deaths, marriages, and yes, the names of newborns, to the household's beehives was considered vital. Bees were seen as liminal creatures, messengers between worlds, and keeping them informed ensured their continued blessing and productivity. Failing to do so could result in them absconding or ceasing to make honey. This underscores a worldview where the formal, respectful articulation of names and significant life events had repercussions not just within the human community, but in the wider, interconnected natural and supernatural world. The whispered name, therefore, was far more than a simple sound. It was a breath of life, a shield of protection, a seed of destiny. It was the first, most intimate bestowing of identity, a magical thread connecting the newborn to its ancestors, its kin, its deities, and its future path. It was a soft utterance carrying immense weight, a peculiar and potent ritual at the very dawn of a new Celtic life. The sacred, intimate ritual of name whispering is complete Ageria. Your tiny Celtic newborn held close has had its unique identifier, its spiritual password breathed gently into its nascent consciousness by a parent, an elder, or perhaps even a revered druid. This act, so full of focused intent and protective magic, has further anchored the child to the world of the living, drawing it more firmly from that liminal space between this realm and the other world. Now, with the name bestowed, at least in its first, most personal utterance, let's explore the kinds of names themselves. The echoes and resonances they carried for in the ancient Celtic worldview. A name was never just an arbitrary collection of pleasing sounds. It was a vessel of meaning, a reflection of heritage, and a potent carrier of hopes and desired destinies. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Celtic personal names, as known to us from a variety of sources, including inscriptions in Roman Britain and Gaul, references in classical Greek and Roman texts, and more extensively from early medieval Irish and Welsh manuscripts, which preserve much older linguistic forms and naming traditions, often had clear and discernible etymological meanings. These were frequently compound names formed by combining two or more elements that related to aspects of nature animals, warfare, and heroic valor. Deities or desirable personal qualities and abstract concepts. Choosing a name for your Celtic baby wasn't like flicking through a modern baby name book for something that just sounded nice or was currently trending amongst the celebrity druid circuit. Oh no, it was serious considered business. You couldn't just casually call your son Kevin because it seemed vaguely pleasant and unlikely to offend any powerful local water spirits. The name had to have substance, it had to have power, and preferably it shouldn't sound too embarrassingly similar to the name of that notoriously grumpy and easily insulted badger spirit who was widely rumored to live down by the misty sacred creek and had a particular dislike for inappropriately or flippantly named infants. One of the richest sources of inspiration for Celtic names was the natural world that surrounded them so intimately. You find names reflecting a deep connection to and reverence for animals, plants, and the landscape itself. For boys' names, incorporating elements like Kuno Hound or Wolf Artos, Bear Brachos Badger, or Brannon Raven were common, suggesting qualities of strength, ferocity, cunning, or a totemic connection to these creatures. If you were a Celtic baby boy, your name wasn't likely to be something as straightforwardly mundane as Bob or Steve. Oh no, you were far more likely to be Kuno Belinos, Hound of Belinus, a sun god, Artogonos, son of the bear, or Branakunos, raven wolf. It really added a certain dramatic, almost feral flair to playtime in the village enclosure. and probably made you feel rather heroic even when you were just enthusiastically mashing berries into your own hair. For girls, names might be drawn from beautiful or cherished plants like Blathnot little flower in Irish tradition, or perhaps from graceful animals or natural phenomena. Deities, of course, also played a significant role in naming traditions. Theophoric names, those which incorporate the name of a god or goddess, were a way of placing the child under the special protection of that deity, or expressing a parental wish that the child might embody some of the god's positive attributes. You might find names linked to Lugh, the many-skilled god of light and craftsmanship, Brigid, the beloved goddess of poetry, smithcraft, and healing, Epona, the horse goddess revered in Gaul and Britain, or various tribal and tutelary deities whose names now only survive as fragments in inscriptions or place names. To name your child after a powerful god was like taking out a kind of spiritual insurance policy, hoping for a bit of divine favor and a celestial helping hand in the rough and tumble of Iron Age life. Given the often martial nature of Celtic society, especially as depicted by their Roman contemporaries, and reflected in their heroic literature, names signifying valor, strength, and success in battle were particularly popular for boys. You find elements like Katu Battle Rig's king, or ruler Valo's prince, or leader Nerto's strength, or words for spear shield or warrior. Naming your tiny, gurgling, and currently rather helpless infant something along the lines of Catrix Battle King or Nerdamaros, great in strength, might seem a tad ambitious while he's still primarily focused on mastering basic head control and the complex art of not accidentally poking himself in the eye. But hey, in the Celtic world, you had to manifest that heroic destiny early, right? It was all about aspirational nomenclature. For girls, names often emphasized desirable qualities such as beauty, fairness, brightness, or perhaps virtues like wisdom or gentleness. Elements like Vindo White Fair, blessed booty victory. But perhaps also abundance or words related to brightness or preciousness might feature. Of course, some female names also carried connotations of strength, or even fierceness, reflecting the powerful female figures found in Celtic mythology, and indeed in historical accounts of warrior queens like Boudica herself, whose name means something like victory. The exact process by which specific Celtic names were chosen for individual newborns and the relative weight given by families to factors such as honoring ancestral lineage, aspiring to certain desirable qualities, for the child seeking the patronage of a particular deity, marking the circumstances of birth, or even considering the purely phonetic aesthetics of the name in different Celtic societies and periods, is an area where direct evidence is understandably limited. Thus, leading historical linguists and onomastician scholars who study names to reconstruct patterns and probabilities from the surviving corpora of names, and by making careful comparisons with naming practices in other related Indo-European cultures. It was likely a complex decision involving family deliberation, perhaps consultation with elders or religious figures if the family was important or the circumstances of the birth unusual. Dreams or omens experienced by the parents around the time of conception or birth might also have been seen as divinely inspired suggestions for a suitable name. A quirky or fringe tidbit that surfaces in some later Irish traditions, which may well preserve much older Celtic customs, is the idea that an individual might acquire different names or significant epithets at different stages of their life, or as a result of performing particularly noteworthy deeds. The famous hero Cu Chulainn, Hound of Cullen, for instance, received this name after a specific youthful exploit, his birth name being Saitanta. While the name bestowed in infancy, the one whispered with such care, would remain the foundational identifier. This fluidity suggests that a name wasn't always entirely fixed from birth, but could evolve to reflect an individual's developing character and life story. The very structure of many Celtic names, often being compounds of two distinct elements, allowed for a rich variety of meanings and associations. This also meant that the name itself could be seen as carrying a kind of inherent story or a condensed prayer for the child's future. The belief that nomen est omen, that the name is a portent that it can shape or predict a person's destiny, was likely a powerful undercurrent in these naming traditions. Choosing a name, therefore, was not just a matter of taste. It was an act of profound responsibility, an attempt to weave a thread of good fortune, strength, and belonging into the very essence of the new child's being. Imagine the stress of being the Celtic parent tasked with this decision. You get it wrong, and instead of your son growing up to be Dubna Valos, Dark Prince, or World Ruler, he somehow ends up with the inherent spiritual resonance and heroic destiny of Dubno-Karkos, slightly confused and ineffectual. Wild boar who is notably bad at finding edible roots. No pressure at all, parents of ancient ancient Gaul. The echoes of these meaningful, power-laden names whispered at the dawn of life were intended to resonate through a lifetime. The echoes of your Celtic baby's newly bestowed name, Egeria, still linger in the smoky air of the roundhouse, a name carefully chosen for its auspicious meaning, its connection to revered ancestors, or its evocation of desired qualities like strength, beauty, or divine favor. You've seen how this name was likely whispered with solemn intent, a magical breath of identity into a new soul. But what if that first ritually spoken name, the one perhaps announced to the assembled kin during the naming day feast, was not the only name your Celtic infant possessed? What if there was another, even more potent, more closely guarded name, a secret soul name designed to shield the child's very essence from unseen perils? This intriguing, if somewhat speculative possibility adds another layer of mystique to those ancient Celtic rituals for welcoming newborns. The foundational belief here, as we've touched upon, is the immense power attributed to names in many ancient cultures, very much including the Celts. A mainstream historical fact is that while direct explicit evidence for a widespread formalized system of secret soul names among the Iron Age Celts is largely inferential and not definitively proven by contemporary inscriptions, the underlying belief that names held inherent power and that knowing an individual's, or a spirit's, true name could grant a measure of influence or control over them is a common and recurring motif in many ancient and traditional belief systems worldwide. This concept is certainly very prominent in later Celtic folklore and mythology, which often preserve much older pre-Christian ideas. In these later tales, heroes, heroines, and even formidable otherworldly beings frequently possess true names that are powerful secrets, the revelation of which can have dramatic, sometimes fatal consequences. So why the need for a secret name? Think back to that ever-present Celtic awareness of the otherworld, and its often capricious, sometimes downright hostile inhabitants. If a name is intrinsically linked to a person's soul or life force, then broadcasting that true essential name indiscriminately could be like handing out the keys to your spiritual kingdom to any passing supernatural entity with less than honorable intentions. Malevolent spirits, ill-wishing sorcerers, or those notoriously acquisitive members of the fairy folk who, as we know, had a particular penchant for fancying human babies, could, if they knew your child's true soul name, potentially use it to exert harmful influence, to cast a debilitating curse to steal its luck or vitality, or even to gain power over its very spirit. Giving your Celtic baby a secret soul name was therefore like enabling a kind of mystical two-factor authentication for their spiritual well-being. The fairies and assorted nefarious sprites might get hold of the public username something like Little Brennus the Surprisingly Loud, but they couldn't access the soul's heavily encrypted mainframe without that carefully guarded, whispered only to the benevolent powers, utterly unguessable password, which might be something wonderfully evocative like Thunder Badger Moon Whisperer CVN Foldstar. Don't tell the goblins. The public name, then. The one used in everyday life might be a more common family name, a descriptive nickname that arose naturally, or a name with a generally positive but perhaps less magically charged meaning. This public name would function as a kind of shield, a buffer deflecting unwanted supernatural attention away from the child's true vulnerable essence, which was protected by the secrecy of its soul name. Whether the ancient Celts widely and formally practiced a distinct system of bestowing deliberately concealed soul names in addition to more public use names for their children is a matter of ongoing scholarly speculation and engaging debate. As a direct epigraphic or contemporary classical textual evidence explicitly describing such a dual naming custom for ordinary individuals is scarce. This forces researchers to rely more on comparative analysis with other cultures known to have such practices. Interpretations of onomastic patterns where individuals sometimes appear with multiple appellations, and the rich thematic evidence found in later Celtic literary traditions where the power and secrecy of true names are so prominent. If such a secret soul name was indeed bestowed, the act of whispering it, which we explored earlier, would take on even greater significance. That soft, intimate utterance by a parent, an elder, or a druid directly into the infant's ear would be the sacred moment of imbuing the child with this hidden protective identity. known perhaps only to a very select few, and to the benevolent guardian spirits or ancestral protectors invoked during the ritual. The druid, after much solemn chanting, some intense soul-searching, staring at a particularly gnarly oak leaf, and perhaps a brief private consultation with a passing cloud formation that looked vaguely like a divine badger, might lean down and whisper the baby's true cosmic soul name. It's so secret, so mystically potent that even the baby isn't entirely sure what it is yet, but its soul apparently gets the memo. Your destiny is mumble mumble, sacred syllable mumble, thunderstone mumble. Got it? Excellent. Now let's all get to the honey cakes before the spirits of the local bog decide they want to share. A quirky or fringe tidbit that resonates with this idea of hidden spiritual identity comes from some shamanistic traditions found in various parts of the world traditions, which, it's worth noting, sometimes share intriguing thematic parallels with aspects of reconstructed druidism. In these practices, a shaman might undertake a dangerous spiritual journey into the otherworld specifically to discover or retrieve a child's true soul name. This name, revealed by spirits, totem animals, or the very landscape itself, would then be considered a vital part of the child's spiritual armor, a sacred connection to their unique destiny and their guardian powers to be used only in the most important rituals or in times of great need. While we have no direct proof, the Celts did exactly this. The underlying principle of a specially sought, spiritually potent, and carefully guarded name aligns well with their known worldview. This practice, if it existed, of having a secret soul name, might also explain why some figures in Celtic myths and legends appear to have multiple names, or acquire new names at significant turning points in their lives, such as initiation or the performance of a great deed. The public name might change with their status or achievements, but the soul name, the anchor of their true being, would remain constant, a hidden source of power and identity. Imagine the profound awkwardness, though. If you somehow forgot your own secret soul name, you're trying to have a deep and meaningful communion with your ancestral spirits, perhaps seeking guidance on whether to plant oats or barley this season, and they're just giving you the celestial equivalent of a 404 soul not found error message. Access denied, incorrect soul password provided. Are you quite sure your great Aunt Morwenna's divinely appointed mystical spiritual successor? And not just some random turnip enthusiast who wandered into the sacred grove by mistake and is now trying to guess the Wi-Fi password. The concept of a guarded, powerful true name underscores the Celts' deep understanding of the magical potency of language and the vulnerability of the individual soul, especially in its earliest, most formative stages. It adds another layer to the peculiar and meticulous rituals surrounding the welcoming of newborns, suggesting a profound desire not just to integrate the child into the human community, but also to weave a strong, almost invisible shield of magical protection around its very essence, safeguarding it for the long and often perilous journey of life in that ancient, spirit-haunted Celtic world. Your Celtic newborn. Egeria has now received its name, perhaps even a secret soul name whispered with sacred intent, a potent charm of identity woven into the very fabric of its being. The child is purified, swaddled, nourished, and formally acknowledged. But in a world so alive with unseen forces, so attuned to the subtle messages of the cosmos, the ancient Celts were not content to simply welcome a new life. They also yearned for glimpses into its future, for signs and portents that might illuminate the path this tiny new traveler was destined to walk. Thus, the period surrounding the birth and naming of your infant would likely have been a time of keen observation, a search for omens in the sky on the earth and in the very behavior of the child itself. A mainstream historical fact is that divination and the meticulous interpretation of omens derived from a wide array of natural phenomena. Animal behavior, dreams, and ritual practices were deeply significant aspects of ancient Celtic religious belief and daily life. Specialized ritual experts, such as the Druids in regions and periods where they held sway, or local seers and wise women, were often tasked with discerning the will of the gods, predicting future events, or understanding the hidden significance of unusual occurrences. The birth of a child, a momentous event in itself, would undoubtedly have been a prime occasion for such divinatory scrutiny. Imagine yourself Egeria in the days immediately following your baby's arrival, or perhaps during the naming ceremony itself. Every unusual event, every subtle shift in the natural world around your roundhouse might be imbued with potential meaning. Did a fierce thunderstorm rage on the night of the birth, or was the sky filled with an unusual profusion of stars? A storm might signify a tumultuous life or a powerful, tempestuous spirit for the child, while a starlit sky could promise brilliance or divine favor. If your Celtic baby is born, and at that exact moment of its first cry, a majestic golden eagle is seen soaring gracefully overhead carrying a particularly shiny, wiggling salmon in its talons, all while a perfectly formed double rainbow appears directly over your thatched roof. The attending druid. If you're lucky enough to have one on call for such auspicious obstetric events, would probably stroke his long white beard with immense satisfaction and declare, well, that's remarkably and unambiguously positive, wouldn't you say? This child is clearly destined either to become a legendary hero capable of leaping across rivers in a single bound, or they're going to be really, really good at fishing. Possibly both. We'll need to consult the sacred oak leaves for further clarification on the fish specifics. The behavior of animals was a rich source of omens for the Celts. The sudden appearance of a specific bird, perhaps a raven often associated with prophecy and otherworldly knowledge, a wren a sacred bird in many Celtic traditions, or an eagle, near the home at the time of birth or naming would be carefully noted. The direction of its flight, its cries, its actions, all could be parsed for meaning. Did a normally shy deer approach the settlement? Did the household dogs behave in an unusual manner? These were not mere coincidences, but potential messages from the gods or the spirit world. Even within the household, any out-of-the-ordinary event could be seen as an omen. Did the hearth fire suddenly flare up brightly or die down unexpectedly during the naming? Did an object fall without apparent cause? Did the newborn itself do something remarkable? Perhaps smile at a particular moment? Or grasp a specific object offered to it? Any weird thing the baby did in those first few days was prime material for prophetic interpretation. Oh, look. He sneezed 3 times in a row while facing directly towards the east. That clearly means he's destined to be a great traveler and will probably discover a new and exciting type of turnip on his voyages. Or, she gripped my finger with a surprisingly strong and rather vice-like grip for a 3-day-old. Clearly she's destined to lead armies into glorious battle, or at the very least win all the really good toys in the village sandpit. It's like an ancient, very earnest version of those overly enthusiastic baby milestone Instagram posts, but with significantly more profound, life-altering prophetic weight attributed to every gurgle and burp. While we don't have detailed Celtic how-to manuals for baby fate divination, we can infer some of the methods from broader Celtic divinatory practices. Augury, the interpretation of the flight and calls of birds, was widely practiced. The mother's dreams during pregnancy or the dreams of a seer or druid specifically sought out concerning the child would have been considered highly significant. Some forms of sortilege or the casting of lots, perhaps using marked stick stones or even pieces of bone, might have been employed to gain insight into the child's dominant characteristics or future path. Scrying, the practice of gazing into a reflective surface like a bowl of water, a polished dark stone, or even into smoke or fire to receive visions could also have been used by a skilled diviner. A quirky or fringe tidbit that highlights the unique ways the Celts sought omens is the reverence some traditions held for the caul, a portion of the amniotic membrane that occasionally remains on a baby's head at birth. A child born with a caul was considered exceptionally lucky, marked for a special destiny, and often believed to be protected against drowning. These cauls were sometimes carefully preserved by families and treasured as powerful amulets throughout the individual's life. If your Celtic baby arrived sporting one of these auspicious veils of fortune, it would be seen as a very positive omen indeed. The specific divinatory techniques employed by the ancient Celts to ascertain a newborn's likely destiny, and more profoundly the degree of fatalism versus a genuine belief in the possibility of actively influencing or shaping that predetermined fate through subsequent ritual actions, propitiation of deities, or careful upbringing, remain complex areas of ongoing scholarly inquiry. Basai, with interpretations often relying on careful analysis of fragmented classical ethnographic accounts of druidic practices, later mythological narratives, which often feature prophecies surrounding heroes' births, and comparative studies of Indo-European belief systems regarding fate and fortune. The purpose of all this omen-seeking and divination wasn't necessarily to try and change a fixed destiny, as fate was often seen as a powerful, almost inexorable force in the Celtic worldview. Rather, it was more about understanding the child's inherent nature, its potential strengths and weaknesses, any special talents or sacred callings it might possess, and perhaps which particular gods or goddesses might be its special patrons, or conversely, which specific dangers or ill fortunes it might need to be particularly guarded against. The omens might even influence the final choice of name, with a name being selected that aligned with a particularly positive portent or offered protection against a negative one. If things looked a bit dicey omen-wise, perhaps a three-legged badger was seen hobbling past the roundhouse in a sinister counterclockwise direction just as the baby was being named. The community wouldn't just throw up their hands in despair. Everyone would likely look expectantly at the local druid or wise woman. The druid would gaze thoughtfully at the badger if it was still around then, at the sky, then perhaps at the patterns of smoke rising from the hearth. After a suitable period of profound silence and intense beard stroking, they might announce, yes, this clearly foretells a future involving maaki, a distinct preference for things with three legs, or perhaps a mild but persistent limp and an unusual fondness for digging up root vegetables after dark. We may need to schedule a follow-up consultation with the sacred bog for more precise details. In the meantime, an extra offering to the spirits of the local badgers wouldn't go amiss. These practices Egeria reveal a people deeply attuned to the world around them, seeing meaning and connection in every aspect of nature and human experience, especially at a moment as charged with potential and vulnerability as the arrival of a new soul into their midst. The sky signs and earth omens were all part of the intricate whispered welcome. The omens have been observed. Egeria, the sky signs and earth portents around the birth and naming of your Celtic newborn meticulously noted, and perhaps interpreted by a village elder or a keen-eyed seer. Hopefully they were largely auspicious, pointing towards a future filled with health, valor, and an appropriate number of well-behaved cattle. But even with a favorable forecast from the divine weather station, the task of safeguarding this tiny new human from the myriad perils of the ancient world, particularly those emanating from that ever-present, often meddlesome other world, is an ongoing daily concern. And so you now turn your attention to the array of specific charms, potent herbs, and time-honored rituals designed to protect the cradle and shield your infant from the attentions of the Fae, the Shadi, the good folk, or whatever local term your particular Celtic tribe uses for those powerful, unpredictable, and not always benevolent inhabitants of the spirit realm. A mainstream historical fact is that across the diverse Celtic cultures of Iron Age and Roman-era Europe, as strongly evidenced by later folklore, which often preserves much older belief systems, archaeological discoveries of amulets, and comparative mythology, there existed a profound and persistent belief in a parallel otherworld. This realm was inhabited by a host of supernatural beings, fairies, spirits, ancestral ghosts, and minor deities, who could and frequently did interact with the human world, often in ways that were perilous for mortals. Newborns and young children, perceived as being in a vulnerable liminal state, were considered especially susceptible to their influence, necessitating a wide range of protective charms, apotropic evil-averting objects, and specific rituals. Your Iron Age Celtic roundhouse isn't just to baby-proofed against hazards like tripping over a stray wolfhound or falling into the central hearth fire. It's meticulously, almost obsessively fairy-proofed. We're talking iron implements strategically placed over every conceivable entryway, sprigs of potent rowan wood tucked into the thatch by the windows, and possibly a discreet, faintly shimmering circle of slightly suspicious-smelling protective salt sprinkled just outside the main doorway. It's essentially a Bronze Age supernatural high-security system, but with significantly more twigs and considerably less CCTV footage. One of the most widely recognized and potent defenses against fairies and other malevolent spirits in Celtic tradition was iron. Cold iron, as it's often called in folklore, was believed to be anathema to otherworldly beings, its very touch capable of repelling them or neutralizing their magic. So a common protective measure would be to place a piece of iron near the newborn or its cradle. This might be a simple iron nail driven into the cradle board, a small knife or blade tucked into the infant's swaddling clothes very carefully. One hopes, or an iron poker kept constantly by the hearth, its presence radiating a protective aura throughout the dwelling. The Jutes, Anglo-Saxons, and Vikings shared similar beliefs, so this wasn't solely a Celtic thing, but it was certainly strong among them. Another powerful botanical guardian was the rowan tree, or mountain ash, with its bright red berries. The rowan was widely revered by the Celts as a tree of protection, its branches believed to ward off witchcraft, evil spirits, and ill luck. Sprigs of rowan might be hung over the cradle, woven into a small wreath to be placed above the baby's head, or even used to construct parts of the cradle itself. Its vibrant red berries, a color often associated with life and protection, further enhanced its apotropaic qualities. Specific herbs also played a crucial role in these protective strategies. While the Christian association of St. John's wort with warding off evil is obviously later, the plant itself, Hypericum perforatum, with its sunny yellow flowers that often bleed a reddish oil when crushed, may well have had pre-Christian protective uses due to these striking characteristics. Juniper, as we've mentioned, for purification, was also burned for its protective smoke, believed to drive away all manner of negative entities. Vervain, another herb with a long history in European folk magic, might be employed as cwd dill, which was sometimes believed to specifically protect against witches or the evil eye. These herbs could be hung in bundles, sewn into tiny sachets, placed in the baby's bedding, or burned as a continuous fragrant. Or perhaps, depending on the herb, rather acrid fumigant to keep the spiritual air clear. Salt, that universal symbol of purity, preservation, and protection, would also have its place. A small dish of salt might be kept near the cradle, or a few grains sprinkled around the sleeping area, or across thresholds to create a barrier against unwelcome spiritual visitors. Hold stones, or hag stones, natural stones with a hole worn through them by water or other natural processes, were highly prized amulets. Looking through the hole was sometimes believed to allow one to see fairies or witches, or more commonly hanging one over a cradle or doorway was thought to prevent such beings from entering or causing harm, especially protecting against nightmares or the evil eye. Red thread or ribbons were also common protective charms. The color red, vibrant and associated with blood and life force, was seen as potent in averting ill luck or deflecting malevolent gazes. A red thread might be tied around your baby's tiny wrist or ankle, or woven into its swaddling clothes. The well-dressed and thoroughly protected Celtic baby Egeria probably sported more mystical protective bling than a particularly cautious archdruid on his way to a potentially hazardous intertribal negotiation. A tastefully arranged sprig of rowan here, a discreetly placed iron nail there, perhaps a charming little necklace made of polished badger teeth for extra good luck and to effectively ward off any overly critical or fashion-conscious fairies who might take issue with the baby's choice of swaddling pattern. Safety first, then style was clearly the Celtic nursery motto. The precise boundary between what ancient Celts considered magic, religious ritual, and folk medicine in their extensive protective practices for infants is often remarkably blurred and frankly rather anachronistic to attempt to define with our modern, sharply delineated categories, as these domains were likely experienced by them as a deeply integrated holistic system of understanding and actively influencing the seen and unseen forces that shaped their world. Beyond specific objects, ritual actions were paramount. Seining, a term particularly common in Scottish Gaelic traditions but reflecting older, widespread Celtic practices, refers to various acts of blessing, consecrating or protecting, often involving the use of sacred water, perhaps from a holy well sprinkled with a branch of a sacred tree, or as we've seen, purifying smoke. Your newborn Egeria would almost certainly have been seined multiple times in its early days. Keeping the central hearth fire burning brightly, especially at night, was not just for warmth. It was a constant vigil against the forces of darkness, both literal and metaphorical. And as we've touched upon, there would be specific spoken charms, lullabies that were also protective incantations, and quiet prayers to ancestral spirits or guardian deities, all woven into the daily care of the infant. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit found in some later Celtic folkloric accounts is the rather endearing practice of placing a piece of the father's clothing, perhaps his worn tunic, or even more specifically and somewhat comically to our ears, a pair of his trousers, over the cradle or near the baby. This was believed to offer strong paternal protection against fairies, either by asserting the father's claim over the child, or perhaps by subtly tricking the fairies into thinking the infant was older, less desirable to steal, or already too closely guarded by a vigilant male presence. Running out of fresh rowan berries. No problem. Just drape Dad's old, slightly muddy, and probably quite fragrant woolen trousers over the cradle. Apparently, mischievous members of the Shitty have a surprisingly strong aversion to unwashed Celtic menswear. Who knew it's the ultimate low-tech, high-aroma spiritual deterrent? All these measures Ageria, the iron, the rowan, the herbs, the salt, the seining, the watchful fire, even Dad's trousers, were part of a comprehensive multi-layered strategy of defense. They speak of a world where the veil between realities was thin, and where the protection of its newest, most vulnerable members was a constant, sacred duty undertaken with a rich combination of practical care, deep-seated belief, and a fascinating array of peculiar, magically charged rituals. Section 12. Your tiny Celtic newborn Ageria is now purified, swaddled, and nourished, named perhaps both publicly and secretly, and surrounded by a veritable fortress of protective charms and vigilant parental care. The immediate acute spiritual dangers of that liminal threshold between the otherworld and this earthly realm have been navigated with all the ritualistic know-how your Iron Age community can muster. But the process of fully welcoming this new life isn't solely about safeguarding it from unseen malevolence. It's also about formally integrating it into the very human, very tangible, and absolutely vital network of its kin. The child must not just be a member of its immediate household. It must be recognized and embraced by the wider clan, the tribe, the people who will form its social universe. A mainstream historical fact is that kinship was the absolute cornerstone of ancient Celtic social structure across Europe. An individual's identity, their legal status, their rights to land and resources, their obligations, their very security were all profoundly defined by their membership in a kin group, known by terms like the Fine in early Irish law or the Cenedl in Welsh tradition. This wasn't just about a nuclear family. It was a much broader network of grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, often to quite distant degrees, all bound by ties of blood, real or perceived, and by mutual responsibilities. Loyalty to one's kin was paramount, and the kin group as a whole shared responsibility for its members. From avenging wrongs in a blood feud, a rather dramatic form of group liability, thankfully less common now, to collectively paying or receiving compensation, the heroic or honor price for injuries or offenses. So formally presenting and welcoming your newborn into this extensive web of relations was a crucial rite of passage, a declaration that this new soul now belonged and was entitled to the protection and support of the entire kindred. Your Celtic baby is about to attend its very first and arguably most important networking event, the grand meet the entire extended clan and try not to get dropped by Great Uncle Baru, who's had a bit too much mead ceremony. This formal presentation to the kin might not happen immediately after birth. The family would likely wait until the child was deemed strong enough, perhaps after a few weeks or even months, and until the mother had also recovered sufficiently from the ordeal of childbirth. It could be timed to coincide with a significant seasonal festival, perhaps Beltane in the spring, with its themes of renewal and fertility, or Samhain in the autumn, a time when the veil to the otherworld was thin and ancestral spirits were close, thus a potent moment to introduce a new descendant. Or it might simply be a special gathering of the extended family called for this specific purpose. The precise nature and specific ceremonial formalities of these rituals for integrating a newborn into the wider kin group among the continental Celts of the Iron Age are like so many of their intimate customs, less well documented in contemporary sources than those described in the much later, though often archaising insular Celtic texts from Ireland and Wales, leading scholars and archaeologists to cautiously extrapolate from these later literary and legal sources while also considering any relevant archaeological evidence from settlement sites that might suggest communal feasting areas or specific ritual locales within a clan's territory. However, we can imagine the scene with a degree of informed speculation. The key members of the extended family, the grandparents, the uncles and aunts from both the mother's and father's side, depending on the specific kinship system, which could have matrilineal or patrilineal biases important. Cousins and perhaps respected elders or leading figures of the wider clan, or Tuath tribe, would assemble likely in the main house of the newborn's parents, or perhaps in a larger communal space within the settlement if the kin group was large. The atmosphere would be one of joyful anticipation and communal solidarity. The father, as head of the immediate household, would likely take the lead in formally presenting his child to the assembled relatives. He might hold the infant aloft, perhaps swaddled in a particularly fine new cloth, or adorned with a special family heirloom if such existed. He would proudly announce the child's name, the public name at least, and declare it a member of his lineage. There might be speeches of welcome from the senior elders of the clan, offering blessings for the child's health strength and future prosperity. They might recount tales of illustrious ancestors, subtly linking this new life to the heroic traditions and enduring strength of the kin group. Symbolic actions would almost certainly have played a part. Perhaps the child was passed from one key relative to another, each one offering a touch, a kiss, or a whispered word of welcome and blessing. A tangible act of embracing the infant into their collective fold. A quirky or fringe tidbit drawn from some later Celtic folkloric traditions and practices in other traditional societies is the idea of a symbolic first footprint. The baby's foot might be gently pressed onto a special stone associated with the ancestral land, or onto a piece of specially prepared earth from the clan's territory, signifying its deep, inalienable connection to the land and the lineage it was now a part of. Or perhaps a specific type of food, one that symbolized kinship abundance or continuity, like a special kind of bread, a portion of honey or milk from a revered family cow, was shared by all present, with a tiny taste perhaps even offered to the infant itself if old enough to ritually bind it to the commensal community. Gift giving would also be an important element of this welcoming ceremony. Relatives arriving for the presentation would likely bring gifts for the newborn and its parents. These wouldn't necessarily be lavish, but they would be meaningful. A finely carved wooden toy, a soft sheepskin for the cradle, a small piece of bronze jewelry, a blessing of good grain, or perhaps even a young animal like a lamb or a calf if the giver was particularly generous and the family well regarded. Great Aunt Morrigan, renowned for her slightly unnerving second sight, and her impressive collection of boar tusks, has gifted the baby a beautifully polished, surprisingly sharp miniature spearhead for good luck in future battles and for effective teething during difficult periods. Uncle Finian, who always smells faintly of peat smoke and fermented berries, has generously offered a very small, slightly bewildered-looking piglet as a contribution to the child's future prosperity. It's like a uniquely Celtic welcome to the tribe starter pack. Just add milk, a few decades of rigorous warrior training, and a lifetime supply of heroic destiny. The culmination of this kinship welcome would almost certainly be a feast. Food and drink shared in common are universal symbols of community, alliance, and celebration. This feast would not only honor the newborn, but would also serve to reaffirm and strengthen the bonds between all the assembled members of the kin. It would be a time for storytelling, for laughter, for sharing news, and for collectively investing hope and goodwill in this newest member of their shared lineage. By the end of the ceremony, Ageria, your Celtic newborn, is no longer just a vulnerable infant belonging to a single household. It is now a recognized and embraced member of a much larger, powerful, and mutually supportive social organism, its kin. Its identity is affirmed, its place secured. It now has not just parents, but a whole network of aunts, uncles, cousins, and elders who have a vested interest in its well-being and its future. Welcome to the kin, little one. You are now officially part of a tightly knit group that will probably fiercely defend your honor, hopefully share their last piece of dried venison with you in times of hardship, and also just possibly inadvertently drag you into a rather complicated generations-long blood feud with the slightly less honorable but surprisingly well-armed clan from over the Misty Hill. Family, eh? Can't live with them, can't successfully defend your prime grazing land without them. Your Celtic newborn Ageria has been purified by the ancient elements, swaddled against the chill and otherworldly influences nourished at its mother's breast, and surrounded by a loving fortress of protective charms and vigilant female kin. It has been formally presented to the wider clan. Its arrival celebrated its place within the great web of kinship, acknowledged through shared blessings and perhaps a joyous feast. The child has even received its name, possibly a potent public one, and an even more powerful secret soul name, whispered to instill identity and ward off ill fortune. But amidst all these communal and maternal rituals, there is one gaze, one specific act of recognition that carries immense legal and social weight in the predominantly patrilineal structure of ancient Celtic society, the father's acknowledgement. A mainstream historical fact is that in most ancient patrilineal societies, and the Celtic world largely fits this pattern, the formal acknowledgement of a newborn by the man presumed to be its father was an absolutely critical act. This wasn't just a sentimental moment of paternal pride, though that may well have been present. It was a crucial legal and social declaration that established the child's legitimacy, its membership within the father's kin group, fine or senatal, and most importantly, its rights to inheritance, social standing, and the protection of that lineage. Without this paternal acceptance, a child's future could be precarious indeed. If the Celtic dad didn't give that official, "Yep, this one's definitely mine," looks just like my great-uncle Fergus after a bad oyster nod of acknowledgement. The poor baby was basically stuck in a kind of social and spiritual limbo, like waiting indefinitely for its otherworldly residency visa to be approved. Sorry, kid. The universe might seem to say, you can't officially join the family feasts, inherit the sacred turnip patch, or be included in the really cool ancestral heroic sagas until dad formally clicks accept on your tiny, gurgling existence. When and how did this vital acknowledgement occur? It likely wasn't a single isolated event, but rather a process culminating in a more formal recognition, often linked to the naming ceremony or the presentation to the kin, as we've discussed. Immediately after birth, or as soon as the mother and child were deemed ready, the father would have been brought in to see his offspring. Imagine yourself, Egeria, as the anxious new Celtic father, stepping into the dimly lit herb-scented birthing space. Your gaze upon the newborn would be intense searching. This is the moment of the father's gaze, a look that carries not just parental curiosity, but also a weight of societal expectation and legal consequence. Is the child healthy? Does it seem vigorous? Does it perhaps bear any resemblance to you or your esteemed ancestors? Though let's be honest, most newborns mostly resemble tiny, slightly grumpy, red-faced potatoes. So ancestral resemblance might be a bit of a stretch at this early stage. The Celtic dad inspects the newborn. It's like a high-stakes, incredibly personal quality or control check. He might ponder gently prodding a tiny foot 10 fingers, 10 toes, an appropriate and impressive level of high-pitched yelling. Yup, all systems appear to be go. Looks like one of mine by the gods. Welcome to the tribe, tiny noise machine. May your spear always fly true, and may you never accidentally anger a water spirit. The formal act of acknowledgement could take various forms. In many ancient cultures, a symbolic gesture by the father signified acceptance. He might lift the child from the ground where it had been placed, a ritual known as tolere liberum in Roman tradition, and something similar likely existed in Celtic custom, thereby physically raising it up into his family. He might place the child on his knee, or formally bestow its name, as we've seen, which in itself was a powerful act of claiming paternity. His public presentation of the child to his assembled kin, declaring it his own, would further solidify this acknowledgement. The legal consequences of this paternal nod were profound. It immediately conferred legitimacy upon the child. This was crucial for inheritance. In a society where property, particularly land, was often tied to lineage, only legitimate children acknowledged by the father could typically inherit from him and his kin group. It also established the child's place within the complex system of rights and responsibilities that defined Celtic kinship. The child was now officially under the father's protection, and by extension, the protection of his entire clan. Conversely, the child also acquired obligations to that kin group as it grew. What if paternity was disputed, or if a father for some reason refused to acknowledge a child born to his wife, or another woman? The precise legal mechanisms and social rituals surrounding paternal acknowledgement of newborns among the diverse Iron Age Celtic tribes, particularly in challenging cases of disputed paternity, or for children born outside of what was considered a formal, socially sanctioned marriage, are not always explicitly detailed in easily accessible contemporary sources, leading scholars to reconstruct these often delicate situations by drawing upon later medieval Celtic legal texts like the Irish Brecon Law's comparative Indo-European customs regarding legitimacy and affiliation, and interpretations of social dynamics implied in mythological narratives. However, it's clear that an unacknowledged child would face a very difficult and precarious social and legal existence, potentially lacking inheritance rights, a clear place in the kin structure, and the full protection of a father's lineage. The mother of an unacknowledged child would also find her own position extremely vulnerable. A quirky or fringe tidbit that hints at the complexities of affiliation can be found in some aspects of early Irish law, the Brecon Laws, which, while later than your Iron Age Celtic focus, Ageria often preserve much older societal concepts. These laws sometimes recognize different degrees of fatherhood, or various ways a child could be legally affiliated with a man, not always solely through direct biological parentage following a formal marriage. For instance, children from less formal unions, or even fostered children, under certain circumstances could acquire specific rights and a recognized status if particular conditions were met and acknowledged, though the position of a child from a fully legitimate, formally acknowledged marriage was generally paramount. The father's acknowledgement also brought with it a host of responsibilities. He was now formally responsible for the child's upbringing, its protection, its education in the ways of the tribe, whether that meant training a son in warfare and herding, or ensuring a daughter learned the essential household arts, and eventually for helping to secure the child's future, such as arranging a suitable marriage for a daughter or establishing a son with his own means of livelihood. That first approving, acknowledging gaze from dad isn't just a casual, "Oh, hello there, new small person." It's essentially a silent, binding, lifelong contract. I hereby formally acknowledge you as my legitimate offspring, small human. In return for this esteemed status, you will endeavor to bring honor to our lineage. You will learn to wield a spear with commendable accuracy or a spindle with exceptional diligence. You will strive not to cause undue embarrassment to me at important annual tribal gatherings by, say, accidentally setting fire to the chieftain's prize-winning ceremonial headdress, and you will preferably, in due course, bring home either a very substantial bride price for yourself or a very useful and well-connected son-in-law. No pressure at all, of course. Welcome to the family. The father's gaze, then. That moment of acceptance was a pivotal point in your Celtic newborn's young life, transforming it from simply a new biological being into a recognized social person, a member of a lineage, an heir to a tradition, and a future participant in the ongoing story of its people. It was a look that carried the weight of ancestry, the promise of belonging, and the full legal and social implications of paternal responsibility in the ancient Celtic world. Your Celtic newborn Ageria has now been firmly and officially welcomed into the heart of its lineage. The father's acknowledging gaze has conferred legitimacy. The naming ceremony has bestowed identity, and the presentation to the wider kin has woven the child into the strong, supportive fabric of the clan. The immediate spiritual and social vulnerabilities of infancy have been carefully navigated with purification rites, protective charms, and the constant vigilance of the household. The child is now a recognized person, a future link in the ancestral chain. But the journey of Celtic childhood, the shaping of this new individual, often involved another significant and rather distinctive social institution, one that took the child beyond the immediate natal hearth into another home for a crucial period of their upbringing: the ancient and deeply ingrained tradition of fosterage. So, just when you think your little Celtic cherub young Brennus, or perhaps little Eponina, has settled nicely into the roundhouse routine, perhaps around the ripe old age of 7, though the age could vary, it might be time for fosterage. Yes, just as they're getting really good at not accidentally setting fire to the thatch or antagonizing the household wolfhounds, it could be time to pack their little bag, probably containing a spare tunic, a favorite smooth rock, and maybe a half-eaten honey cake, and send them off for an extended stay with another family. It's like an ancient, very long-term, and somewhat more rugged version of an international exchange student program, but with significantly more meat at feasts, a complete absence of Wi-Fi, and a much higher chance of your foster uncle casually teaching you how to expertly rustle cattle from the next valley overall as part of a well-rounded education. Of course, a mainstream historical fact is that fosterage, known as altrum in Old Irish and Mithrin in Welsh, with cognate terms across other Celtic languages, was a significant and remarkably widespread social institution among Celtic peoples, particularly well documented in early medieval Ireland and Wales, whose laws and literature are believed to reflect much older pre-Christian Iron Age traditions. This wasn't primarily a system for caring for orphans, though that could be one aspect. Rather, it was a common practice for children, especially those from noble or well-to-do families, to be sent to be raised, educated, and trained for a substantial period, often from around the age of 7 until adolescence, perhaps to age 14 for girls, and 17 for boys in the household of another family. These foster parents could be maternal, kin, the mother's brother. The avunculate was often a favored choice, highlighting the importance of the maternal line in some Celtic societies. Paternal kin or sometimes even non-relatives chosen for their specific skills status, or to forge a new alliance. What was the purpose of this seemingly counterintuitive practice of sending your beloved children away to be raised by others? The motivations were multifaceted and deeply embedded in the Celtic social structure. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, fosterage was a powerful mechanism for creating and strengthening alliances between families and kin groups. Sending a child to be fostered with another family forged an incredibly strong, almost sacred bond between the two households. The foster child became in many ways like a natural child to the foster parents, and the ties between foster siblings Comhaltaí in Irish were often considered to be exceptionally close and enduring, sometimes even stronger and more fiercely loyal than those between biological siblings. These foster bonds created networks of mutual support, obligation, and affection that could last for generations, crucial in a society where interclan rivalries could be common. Secondly, fosterage provided a vital means of education and specialized training. A child might be sent to a foster father renowned for his martial prowess to learn the arts of warfare, or to a foster mother known for her skill in healing poetry or fine embroidery. A chieftain might send his son to be fostered by a powerful neighboring lord to learn statecraft and diplomacy. It was a way of ensuring that children received specific skills and cultural knowledge that might not be available within their own immediate household, broadening their horizons and preparing them for their adult roles in society. Being a Celtic foster parent wasn't just about providing an extra sleeping mat and a share of the daily porridge. It was a serious commitment involving not just the child's physical upkeep, but their comprehensive education in practical skills, social graces, and the intricate codes of honor and obligation that governed Celtic life. "All right, little Angus," a stern but kindly foster father might declare, "enough chasing the chickens for one morning. Today's lesson plan includes advanced spear-chucking techniques, followed by a practical seminar on the correct and most intimidating way to wear your battle woad, and then, if we have time before the evening feast, a brief introduction to composing a suitably boastful epic poem about your own future heroic and undoubtedly glorious deeds. Pay attention, lad, there may well be a pop quiz involving actual, rather pointy spears later on." Thirdly, fosterage served to broaden a child's social network, giving them valuable connections and a sense of belonging within a wider community beyond their immediate birth family. It could also be a political strategy. Sending a child to be fostered with a more powerful lord could be a way of demonstrating loyalty, securing favor, or even serving as a kind of high-status hostage to ensure peaceful relations. This was not an informal arrangement. The terms of fosterage were often clearly defined, almost like a contract. Brecon law tracts from early medieval Ireland, for example, lay out detailed regulations concerning fosterage, specifying the duration, the fosterage fee compensation paid by the birth parents to the foster parents for the child's upbringing and education. It wasn't a free service. The specific skills the child was to be taught, and the reciprocal responsibilities of both the birth parents and the foster parents. The foster parents had a solemn duty to care for, protect, and educate their fosterling as if it were their own. The precise prevalence and exact social functions of different types of fosterage arrangements across the various continental Celtic societies of the Iron Age, prior to the more detailed written evidence we have from the later insular Celtic sources of Ireland and Wales, remain somewhat speculative and are subjects of ongoing scholarly discussion. Though the underlying principle of strengthening interfamily and intertribal bonds through the carefully managed exchange of children for upbringing and education is widely considered to be a likely ancient and deeply rooted Indo-European practice, not just a later Celtic development. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit that highlights the extraordinary depth of these foster relationships is the concept of the foster brother Comhalta bond in Irish sagas. These connections forged in childhood through shared upbringing in a foster household were often portrayed as the most powerful and inviolable of loyalties, with foster brothers frequently depicted fighting side by side to the death, avenging each other, and demonstrating a level of devotion that could surpass even that between biological siblings. These weren't just your childhood buddies you occasionally met up with for a pint of mead. Your foster brother was your absolute ride or die. I'll gladly help you hide the bodies of those troublesome rival chieftains, probably, and then compose a really moving lament for you afterwards, lifelong companion. It makes most modern sibling rivalries over who gets the last slice of pizza seem rather tame and uninspired in comparison. For you, the Celtic child Egeria being sent into fosterage would have been a major life event. There would be the emotional wrench of leaving your birth parents and siblings, but also the excitement or trepidation of entering a new household, learning new skills, and forming new lifelong bonds. It was a system designed to weave individuals into a larger social fabric, ensuring that Celtic society, for all its tribal divisions and potential for conflict, was also bound together by these deeply personal, cross-cutting ties of shared upbringing and mutual obligation, all beginning with the safe arrival and ritual welcome of each precious newborn. Word count 1391. The flickering light of the hearth in your ancient Celtic roundhouse begins to soften Egeria. The tales of whispered names, protective charms, and the strong bonds of kinship and fosterage gently lulling your mind. We have journeyed through the perilous yet sacred moments of birth, witnessed the meticulous rituals designed to safeguard new life, and glimpsed the intricate social customs that wove each child into the vibrant tapestry of its people. From the first purifying rites with water and fire to the magical utterance of a name, imbued with power and destiny and the eventual embrace of the wider clan, every step was steeped in a profound understanding of the delicate balance between the human world and the ever-present otherworld. These ancient Celts, with their deep reverence for nature, their complex spiritual beliefs, and their strong communal ties, approached the arrival of a newborn with a mixture of joyous celebration and solemn responsibility. They understood the fragility of new life, but also its immense potential, its power to ensure the continuity of their lineage and their traditions. The peculiar rituals we've explored tonight, those whispered names and carefully chosen charms, were their heartfelt attempts to nurture that potential, to shield it from harm, and to set it firmly on a path blessed by ancestors and favored by the gods. As the scent of wood smoke seems to fade, and the rhythmic sounds of the Iron Age village recede into the quiet of your own approaching sleep, perhaps you can carry with you a sense of connection to these distant lives. A gentle appreciation for the timeless human impulse to welcome, protect, and cherish each new generation. The names may be different, the rituals unfamiliar, but the love, the hope, and the quiet wonder surrounding a newborn child echo an unchanging truth across the millennia. The significant Celtic tradition of fosterage Egeria has shown us how the upbringing and social integration of a child often extended far beyond the natal hearth, weaving intricate bonds of loyalty and shared experience across different kin groups. This practice, like the naming ceremonies, the purification rites, and the constant vigilance against otherworldly perils, all underscores the immense societal investment in each new life. But where do these very real, very human customs and anxieties find their grandest, most dramatic expression? Often it is in the shimmering, larger-than-life realm of myth and heroic legend. As you delve deeper into the Celtic imagination, you'll see how these peculiar ancient birthing and naming rituals, these concerns for protection and destiny, are echoed, magnified, and imbued with even greater wonder in the tales of famed infants who were destined for greatness. A mainstream historical fact is that Celtic mythology, particularly as preserved in the rich vernacular literatures of early medieval Ireland, such as the Ulster Cycle featuring Cuchulainn and Wales the Mabinogion, with heroes like Pryderi, is replete with extraordinary birth narratives for its most significant heroes and divine or semi-divine figures. These are not your everyday roundhouse deliveries. These births are frequently marked by supernatural conceptions, unusual gestations, prophecies, potent omens, and direct intervention from the otherworld, all serving to signal from the very outset that this child is no ordinary mortal. When a truly legendary Celtic hero was about to make their grand entrance into the world, it wasn't just a quiet, "Oh look, it's a boy," announcement followed by passing around some slightly stale honey cakes. It was more along the lines of, "Hark, a child of destiny is born." The very earth trembles. Druids across 3 provinces are simultaneously having intensely vivid, if somewhat alarming, prophetic visions. And look, the infant is already attempting to bench press a small, startled boar. This one, my friends, is going to be exceptionally interesting and probably quite expensive to feed. Consider the birth of Cuchulainn, the great hero of Ulster. His conception is a marvel of divine and mystical complexity involving the god Lugh, a triple birth for his human mother, Deichtire, and shape-shifting shenanigans with flocks of magical birds. His childhood name is Setanta, but he earns his more famous moniker Cuchulainn, Hound of Cullann, after a youthful exploit where he slays the ferocious guard dog of Cullann the Smith and then offers to take the dog's place. A dramatic renaming linked directly to a heroic deed, echoing that real-world Celtic idea that names could evolve with one's accomplishments. Or think of Lugh Lamfada, Lugh of the Long Arm, another major figure whose birth is also entangled with complex prophecies, dynastic struggles, and attempts by his grandfather, the Fomorian tyrant Balor of the Evil Eye, to prevent his prophesied arrival. Lugh's survival as an infant, often involving being hidden away or magically protected, underscores that theme of extreme vulnerability we discussed even for those destined for incredible power. These Celtic hero birth stories are like the original high fantasy superhero origin tales. Forget your friendly neighborhood radioactive spiders or tragic Kryptonian refugee backstories. You've got complex divine parentage, clandestine magical foster parents, residing in secret otherworldly fortresses, and a childhood curriculum that probably involved casually wrestling sea monsters before breakfast and learning to recite epic poetry backwards by age 5, all in a typical day's work for little Lugh or pint-sized Pryderi. The naming of these mythical infants is often a moment of profound significance, sometimes performed by a druid, a seer, or even an otherworldly being who recognizes the child's inherent qualities or foresees its destiny. The names themselves, as in real Celtic tradition, are frequently meaningful, alluding to the child's divine ancestry, its prophesied deeds, or particular characteristics. The power of the true name is a potent force in these tales. Knowing a hero's real name or tricking them into revealing it can sometimes give an adversary a dangerous advantage. The omens and prophecies surrounding these mythic births are naturally far more dramatic and explicit than the subtle sky signs or animal behaviors that might have been observed for an ordinary Celtic child. Druids might declaim detailed futures, poets might compose inspired verses foretelling the hero's entire life trajectory, and the very elements might react to the arrival of such a significant new soul. This reflects the real-world Celtic practice of divination at birth, but amplified to a legendary scale appropriate for a figure whose life will shape the destiny of their people. Protective measures for these hero infants are also taken to extraordinary, often magical lengths. While your everyday Celtic baby might be guarded with iron rowan and whispered charms, a future legendary hero might be hidden in an enchanted forest, suckled by a magical doe fostered by a powerful warrior queen. In a fortress impervious to unwelcome visitors or wrapped in a special cloak woven with spells of invisibility and invulnerability. The underlying anxiety about protecting vulnerable new life is the same. But in the myths, the threats are greater, and so too are the magical defenses. The extent to which the often fantastical and highly elaborate birth and childhood narratives of these Celtic mythological heroes represent direct, unadulterated survivals of ancient Iron Age ritual practices and beliefs, versus being later literary elaborations, symbolic storytelling, or even conscious archiving by medieval Christian-era scribes and redactors who were both preserving and reinterpreting much older oral traditions, remains a complex and fascinating area of ongoing scholarly investigation in Celtic studies. It's likely a blend the myths almost certainly contain genuine echoes of very ancient rituals, beliefs, and societal structures, but these have been filtered, reshaped, and embellished over centuries of oral transmission and eventual transcription. A quirky or fringe tidbit that often appears in these heroic birth and childhood sagas is the imposition of a Gaelic plural Gaisha upon the young hero. A Gaisha is a peculiar kind of magical injunction, a taboo or a set of often quite arbitrary-seeming prohibitions or obligations, which if broken even unknowingly will inevitably lead to the hero's misfortune or downfall. Imagine your little Celtic hero baby arriving, and part of its welcoming package along with the swaddling clothes and the first taste of honey is a divinely imposed, non-negotiable Gaisha. Thou shalt not under any circumstances eat a salmon that has been cooked on a Tuesday while wearing mismatched socks and simultaneously whistling a jaunty battle tune lest thy doom befall thee with surprising alacrity. It certainly adds a layer of unique complexity and preordained tragic potential to meal planning laundry day, and indeed the entire heroic career path for the parents and the child. Even the Celtic tradition of fosterage, which we touched upon as a real-world social institution, is reflected and magnified in the myths. Many heroes like Cuchulainn spend their formative years in the care of renowned foster parents, mighty warriors, wise druids, or powerful queens who impart to them their extraordinary skills, their knowledge of warfare, their understanding of honor codes, and their heroic ethos. This mythical fosterage underscores the importance of specialized education and the powerful bonds of loyalty that could be formed outside the immediate natal family, all contributing to the shaping of a hero destined for great, if often perilous, deeds. So as you contemplate the world of your Celtic newborn Egeria, you can see how the everyday rituals and anxieties surrounding its arrival, the need for protection, the significance of a name, the hope for a favorable destiny, the importance of kinship and upbringing, all find their amplified, more magical, and often more dramatic echoes in the grand, sweeping narratives of myth. The legends provide a kind of divine blueprint, a heightened reality against which the ordinary human experience of welcoming new life is played out, imbued with a sense of connection to something ancient, powerful, and deeply woven into the spiritual landscape of the Celtic world. And so, Egeria, our journey through the mists of time into the heart of ancient Celtic traditions for welcoming newborns, draws towards its sleepy close. We've seen how the echoes of these ancient rituals, these profound concerns for protection, identity, and belonging, resonate even in the grand, fantastical birth narratives of their most famed mythological heroes. From the sacred peril of the birthing hut to the solemnity of the naming day, from the whispered power of secret soul names to the watchful reading of omens and the intricate web of foster bonds, you have glimpsed a world where the arrival of a new life was an event of immense communal and spiritual significance, managed with a rich tapestry of peculiar, often enchanting customs. But as we reflect on this journey, it's also important to acknowledge the very nature of the threads from which we've woven this understanding. Reconstructing the intimate rituals of a largely non-literate Iron Age society like that of the ancient Celts is a delicate and often challenging endeavor. A mainstream historical fact is that our understanding of these ancient Celtic religious beliefs and social customs, particularly for the pre-Roman era, is primarily pieced together from a mosaic of often indirect sources. The Celts themselves, especially their priestly class. The Druids famously prioritized oral tradition for the transmission of sacred knowledge, law, and poetry, reportedly believing that committing such wisdom to writing could diminish its power or allow it to fall into unworthy hands. The Druids, bless their mysterious, oak-loving, and distinctly non-paper trail-leaving hearts, weren't big on exhaustive record-keeping for posterity. Sacred knowledge of the cosmos and the intricate genealogies of 17 generations, they might have said. Oh, we just memorized 20 years worth of incredibly complex bardic poetry, all the laws of the land, and the precise astrological alignments for successful turnip planting. Paperwork is so terribly Roman and frankly rather déclassé, which is wonderful for the mystique and the power of their oral tradition, but admittedly a tad less helpful for future historians, armed with trowels and very specific questions about 4th century BC baby naming protocols. This means that much of what we surmise comes from external accounts, primarily from Greek and Roman writers like Caesar Tacitus Strabo and Diodorus Siculus. While invaluable, these classical ethnographies were often written by outsiders, sometimes with their own political agendas or cultural biases, and their focus was frequently on Celtic warfare political structures or what they perceived as barbaric religious practices rather than the quieter domestic rituals surrounding childbirth and infancy. Then there is archaeology, which provides tangible clues. The layout of roundhouses and settlements. Grave goods found with infants, though these are often tragically sparse for the very young votive offerings at sacred springs or groves, and iconographic hints from Celtic art. These can suggest beliefs about protection, the afterlife, and the value of children, but they rarely spell out the precise details of a naming ceremony or a purification rite. Our richest, most detailed textual sources often come from much later periods, particularly the early medieval vernacular literature of Ireland and Wales. These magnificent sagas, law tracts like the Irish Brecon Laws, and mythological cycles, though written down by Christian monks, centuries after the peak of pagan Celtic society, are widely believed to preserve genuine echoes, sometimes remarkably intact, of much older pre-Christian beliefs, customs, and oral traditions. Disentangling these authentic ancient threads from later Christian interpretations or literary embellishments is the constant fascinating challenge for Celtic scholars. The ongoing scholarly challenge in reconstructing ancient Celtic ritual practices for newborns therefore lies in critically evaluating these often late and heavily filtered textual sources, carefully interpreting often ambiguous archaeological data, and judiciously discerning authentic pre-Christian survivals and Indo-European parallels from later syncretic developments or purely literary inventions by medieval authors. It's like trying to assemble a truly beautiful, incredibly important, and very ancient IKEA flat-pack cradle, but you've only been given about a third of the original instruction manual. Half the crucial screws and dowels are irretrievably missing. Presumed lost in the mists of time, and the assembly diagrams were apparently drawn by someone who firmly believed that a somewhat enigmatic picture of a salmon of wisdom was a perfectly adequate substitute for actual step-by-step directions. Yet despite these challenges, the allure of these ancient Celtic ways of welcoming new life remains potent. There's a profound connection to the natural world evident in their beliefs and rituals, the reverence for sacred trees, wells, and animals, the attunement to seasons and sky signs. There's a deep sense of the spiritual world interwoven with the mundane, a belief in the permeability of the veil between this life and the other world, which, while perhaps unsettling, also imbued existence with a certain magic and mystery. There's also in many of these traditions a notable, though not uncomplicated, presence and agency of female figures, of both divine powerful goddesses and human wise women priestesses in some accounts, and mothers at the center of the birthing process. What might seem peculiar to us from our modern, often more secularized and medicalized perspective on childbirth, the whispering of names, the fear of fairies, the elaborate purification rites, was for the ancient Celts a deeply meaningful and entirely logical system for navigating one of life's most critical and vulnerable transitions. These rituals addressed fundamental human concerns: the desire for healthy children, the need for protection against unseen dangers, the importance of individual identity, the strength found in kinship, and the hope for a future blessed by benevolent powers. A quirky or fringe tidbit that speaks to the Celtic reverence for hidden knowledge and perhaps the power of names is the Ogham alphabet. This early medieval Irish script, primarily found on stone inscriptions, consists of a series of straight or angled notches cut along the edge of a stone. Some scholars have speculated that Ogham might have originated from an even earlier, pre-literate system of hand signals notches on wooden message sticks, or secret symbols used by druids for communication, divination, or recording sacred knowledge, highlighting a tradition where some forms of important information were deliberately esoteric or non-monumental, perhaps like those whispered soul names. So as the fire in our imaginary roundhouse burns low, Ageria and the shadows lengthen, we leave the ancient Celts to their unique ways of welcoming their newborns. While the specific details of many of their rituals may be lost to us, obscured by time and the shift of cultures, the underlying human emotions, the joy, the hope, the anxiety, and the fierce protective love that surround the arrival of a new child remain timeless and instantly recognizable. There's something about the ancient Celts, the evocative mist, the palpable magic, the tales of heroes, the magnificent mustaches one assumes based on some depictions, that just keeps us coming back for more, even if half the time we're basically just making highly educated, affectionately embellished guesses about what on earth they were actually doing with that particular sprig of sacred mistletoe and the slightly alarmed-looking ceremonial chicken. The whispers of their names and the names they whispered to their children continue to echo faintly through the ages, a gentle invitation to keep listening to the past.